within your company. I was looking at your website a few minutes ago, and it looks like you list 5 individuals as leadership in your company, but none of them is African American. I was just looking at it, not only you and Cheryl, but David, Mike, and Chris. That is your leadership team, and this does not reflect America. Can you improve the numbers on your leadership team to be more diverse?
Congressman, this is an issue that we're focused on. We have a broader leadership than just 5 people. I mean,
it's not on your website.
I understand that.
We can do better than that, Mr. Zuckerberg. We certainly can. Do you plan to add an African American to your leadership team in the foreseeable future, and will you commit that you will continue to work with us, the Congressional Black Caucus, to increase diversity within your company that you're so proud of?
Congressman, we will certainly work with you. This is an important issue.
We also find that companies' failure to retain black employees contributes to their low presence at technology companies, and there's little transparency in retention numbers. So will you commit to providing numbers on your retention? That's the big word, retention of your employees, disaggregated by race in your diversity update starting this year? Can we get that data? That's the starting point.
Congressman, we try to include a lot of important information in the diversity updates. I will go discuss that with my team after I get back from this hearing.
I'm out of time, sir. I'll take this up with your team in another setting. We'll be out there in a few weeks. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes the chairman of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee, gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Harper, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being here. And we don't lose sight of the fact that you're a great American success story. It is a part of everyone's life and business, sometimes maybe too often. But I thank you for taking the time to be here. And our concern is to make sure that it's fair. We worry because we're looking at possible government regulation here, certainly the self-governing, which has had some issues, and how you factor that. And we're trying to keep up with the algorithm changes on how you determine the prioritization of the news feeds, and you look at, well, it needs to be trustworthy and reliable and relevant. Well, who's going to determine that? That also has an impact. And even though you say you don't want the bias, it is dependent upon who's setting what those standards are in that. And so I want to ask you a couple of questions, if I may. And this is a quote from Paul Grewal, Facebook's VP and General Counsel. He said, "Like all app developers, Mr. Alexander Kogan requested and gained access to information from people after they chose to download his app." Now, under Facebook policy in 2013, if Cambridge Analytica had developed the This Is Your Digital Life app, they would have had access to the same data they purchased from Mr. Kogan. Would that be correct?
Congressman, that's correct. And a different developer could have built that app.
Okay, now, according to politifact.com, and this is a quote, the Obama campaign and Cambridge Analytica both gained access to huge amounts of information about Facebook users and their friends, and in neither case did the friends of app users consent, close quote. This data that Cambridge Analytica acquired was used to target voters with political messages, much as the same type of data was used by the Obama campaign to target voters in 2012. Would that be correct?
Congressman, the big difference between these cases is that in the Kogan case, people signed into that app expecting to share the data with Kogan, and then he turned around and, in violation of our policies and in violation of people's expectations, sold it to a third-party firm, to Cambridge Analytica in this case.
Sure.
I think that we were very clear about how the platform worked at the time, that anyone could sign into an app and they'd be able to bring their information if they wanted and some information from their friends. People had control over that, so if you wanted, you could turn off the ability to sign into apps or turn off the ability for your friends to be able to bring your information. The platform worked the way that we had designed it at the time. I think we now know that we should have a more restrictive platform where people cannot also bring information from their friends and can only bring their own information. But that's the way that the system worked.
And whether in violation of the agreement or not, you agree that users have an expectation that their information would be protected and remained private and not be sold. And so that's something that, the reason that we're here today. You know, and I can certainly understand the general public's outrage if they're concerned regarding the way Cambridge Analytica required their information. But if people are outraged because they use that for political reasons, would that be hypocritical? Shouldn't they be equally outraged that the Obama campaign used the data of Facebook users without their consent in 2012?
Congressman, what I think people are rightfully very upset about is that an app developer that people had shared data with sold it to someone else, and frankly, we didn't do enough to prevent that or understand it soon enough.
Thank you.
And now we have to go through and put in place systems that prevent that from happening again, and making sure that we have sufficient controls in place in our ecosystem so that way developers can't abuse people's data.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg. My time's expired. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentlelady from California, Ms. Matsui, is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Zuckerberg. Thank you very much here. You know, I was just thinking about Facebook and how you developed your platform, first from a social platform amongst friends and colleagues and enjoying a community. And a lot of that was based upon trust, because you knew your friends, right? But that evolved into this business platform, and one of the pillars still was trust. And I think I think everyone here agree that trust is in short supply here, and that's why we're here today. Now, you've constantly maintained that consumers own the data they provided to Facebook and should have control over it. And I appreciate that, and I just want to understand more about what that means. To me, if you own something, you ought to have some say about how and when it's used. But to be clear, I don't just mean pictures, email addresses, Facebook groups, or pages. I understand the data and information consumers provided to Facebook can be and perhaps is used by algorithms to form assumptions and inferences about users to better target ads to the individuals. Now, do you believe that consumers actually own their data even when that data has been supplemented by a data broker, assumptions algorithms have made about that user or otherwise? And this is kind of the question that Ms. Blackburn has come up with, our own comprehensive profile, which is kind of our virtual self.
Congresswoman, I believe that people own all of their own content. Where this gets complicated is, let's say I take a photo and I share it with you. Now, is that my photo or is it your photo? I would take the position that it's our photo, which is why we make it so that you can't bring, is that I can bring that photo to another app if I want, but you can't.
Well, once it gets to the data broker, though, so there's certain algorithms and certain assumptions made. What happens after that?
Sorry, can you clarify that?
Well, what I mean is that if you supplement this data, you know, you say you're owning it, but you supplement this when other data brokers, you know, use their own algorithms to supplement this and make their own assumptions, then what happens there? Because that is, to me, somebody else is taking that over. How can you say that we own that data?
Congresswoman, all the data that you put in, all the content that you share on Facebook is yours. You control how it's used. You can remove it at any time. You can get rid of your account and get rid of all of it at once.
No, but you can't claw it back once it gets out there, right? I mean, that's really, we might own our own data, but once it's used in advertising, we lose control over it. Is that not right?
Congresswoman, I disagree with that, because one core tenet of our advertising system is that we don't sell data to advertisers. Advertisers don't get access to your data. There's a core misunderstanding about how that system works, which is that, let's say if you're a shop and you're selling muffins, right? You might want to target people in a specific town who might be interested in baking or some demographic, but we don't send that information to you. We just show the message to the right people. And that's a really important, I think,
Yeah,
common
I understand
misunderstanding
that,
about
but
how the system works.
Facebook sells ads based at least on part of the data users provide to Facebook. That's right. And the more data that Facebook collects allows you to better target ads to users or classes of users. So even if Facebook doesn't earn money from selling data, doesn't Facebook earn money from advertising based on that data?
Yes, Congresswoman, we run ads. That's the business model is running ads. And we use the data that people put into the system in order to make the ads more relevant, which also makes them more valuable. But it's what we hear from people is that if they're going to see ads, they want them to be good and relevant.
But
So
we're not
that's-
controlling that data.
No, you have complete control over that.
The gentlelady's time has expired. As previously agreed, we will now take a 5-minute recess, and committee members and our witness need to plan to be back in about 5 minutes. We stand in recess.
See, sir. Yes, sir. Doing great. Thank you. Talk to you, sir.
That's a good call. Excuse me, Jack me in too.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I won't.
Kind of put a little table
I wish I could.
That's what I'm saying. Like stay a little longer and then.
No, I was just like cracked the word. Yeah. I'm very. I know.
Transcript, you need to do like a transcript for time, and go back and measure it per minute or whatever. Might have to do that. That might be the hard part. Yeah, but you have to transcript for time.
You have to do the library. Yeah, that's not an issue. Not an issue. You get the time signal. So each word, you get the exact time signal.
Oh, from where? Video?
Yeah, these are all saved. Yeah, they're all recorded. You go back and watch it. They're just simple time signals.
I want to catch. You stick it out.
Actually, I didn't really want
Yeah, and this are tables.
Oh, are you beyond?
Yeah, I'm
Can I record that your way?
thinking you guys are the best options.
We'll call the Energy and Commerce Committee back to order and recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Lance, for 4 minutes for purposes of questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, you are here today because you are the face of Facebook, and you have come here voluntarily, and our questions are based upon our concern about what has occurred and how to move forward. I'm sure you have concluded, based upon what we've asked, that we are deeply offended by censoring of content inappropriately by Facebook. Examples have been raised, a Roman Catholic university, a state Senate candidate in Michigan. I would be offended if this censoring were occurring on the left as well as the right, and I want you to know that. And do you take from what we have indicated so far that in a bipartisan fashion, Congress is offended by inappropriate censoring of content?
Congressman, yes, this is extremely important, and I think the point that you raise is particularly important, that we've heard today a number of examples of where we may have made content review mistakes on conservative content, but I can assure you that there are a lot of folks who think that we make content moderation or content review mistakes of liberal content as well.
Fair enough. My point is that we don't favor censoring in any way, so long as it doesn't involve hate speech or violence or terrorism, and of course the examples today indicate quite the contrary, number one. Number two, Congresswoman Blackburn has mentioned her legislation. I'm a co-sponsor of the browser legislation. I commend it to your attention, to the attention of your company. It is for the entire ecosystem. It is for ISPs and edge providers. It is not just for one or the other. It is an opt-in system similar to the system that exists in Europe. Might I respectfully request of you, Mr. Zuckerberg, that you and your company review the browser legislation, and I would like your support for that legislation after your review of it.
We will review it and get back to you.
Thank you very much. Your COO, Sheryl Sandberg, last week appeared on the Today program, and she admitted the possibility that additional breaches in personal information could be discovered by the current audits. Quote, "We're doing an investigation, we're going to do the audits, and yes, we think it's possible. That's why we're doing the audits." And then the COO went on to say, Facebook cared about privacy all along, but I think we got the balance wrong. Do you agree with the statement of your COO?
Yes, Congressman, I do. We were trying to balance two equities. On the one hand, making it so that people had data portability, the ability to bring their data to another app in order to have new experiences in other places, which I think is a value that we all care about. On the other hand, we also need to balance making sure that everyone's information is protected. And I think that we didn't get that balance right up front.
Thank you. I certainly concur with the statement of the COO, as affirmed by you today, that you got the balance wrong. And then regarding Cambridge Analytica, the fact that 300,000 individuals or so gave consent, but that certainly didn't mean they gave consent to 87 million friends. Do you believe that that action violated your consent agreement with the Federal Trade Commission?
We do not believe it did, but regardless, we take a broader view of what our responsibility is to protect people's privacy. And if a developer who people gave their information to, in this case Alexander Kogan, then goes and in violation of his agreement with us sells the data to Cambridge Analytica, that's a big issue. And I think people have a right to be very upset. I'm upset that that happened. And we need to make sure that we put in place the systems to prevent that from happening again.
Thank you. I think it may have violated the agreement with the Federal Trade Commission, and I'm sure that will be determined in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman from New Jersey. Recognize the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Castor, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Zuckerberg. For all of the benefits that Facebook has provided in building communities and connecting families, I think a devil's bargain has been struck. And in the end, Americans do not like to be manipulated. They do not like to be spied on. We don't like it when someone is outside of our home watching. We don't like it when someone is following us around the neighborhood, or even worse, following our kids or stalking our children. Facebook now has evolved to a place where you are tracking everyone. You are collecting data on just about everybody. Yes, we understand the Facebook users that proactively sign in are in part of that platform, but you're following Facebook users even after they log off of that platform and application. And you are collecting personal information on people who do not even have Facebook accounts. Isn't that right?
Congresswoman, I believe that
yes or no?
Congresswoman, I'm not sure that, I don't think that that's what we're tracking.
No, you're collecting, you have already acknowledged that you are doing that for security purposes and commercial purposes. So you're collecting data outside of Facebook. When someone goes to a website and it has the Facebook like or share, that data is being collected by Facebook, correct?
Congresswoman,
yes or no?
That's right, that we understand in order to show which of your friends.
Yeah, so for people that
like
don't even
page.
have Facebook, I don't think that the average American really understands that today, something that fundamental. And that you're tracking everyone's online activities, their searches. You can track what people buy, correct?
Congresswoman,
you're collecting that data, what people purchase online. Yes or no?
Actually, if they share it with us, but Congresswoman,
because it has a share button, so it's gathering. Facebook has the application. In fact, you've patented applications to do just that. Isn't that correct? To collect that data.
Congresswoman, I don't think any of those buttons share transaction data. But broadly,
but they
disagree
track
with
you. You're collecting medical data, correct, on people that are on the internet, whether they're Facebook users or not, right?
Congresswoman, yes, we collect some data for
and you're collecting. You watch where we go. Senator Durbin had a funny question yesterday about where you're staying, and you didn't want to share that, but Facebook also gathers that data about where we travel. Isn't that correct?
Congresswoman, everyone has control over how that works.
I'm going to get to that, but yes, you are. Would you just acknowledge that, yes, Facebook that's the business you're in, gathering data and aggregating that data?
Congresswoman, I disagree with that characterization.
You're not. Are you saying you do not gather data on where people travel based upon their internet and the ways they sign in and things like that?
Congresswoman, the primary way that Facebook works is that people choose to share data, and they share
primary way, but
the
other way that Facebook gathers data is you buy data from data brokers outside of the platform, correct?
Congresswoman, we just announced 2 weeks ago that we were going to stop interacting with data brokers, and even though that's an industry norm to make it so that the advertising can be more relevant.
But I think in the end, it's practically impossible these days to remain untracked. in America, for all the benefits Facebook has brought and the internet. And that's not part of the bargain. And current laws have not evolved, and the Congress has not adopted laws to address digital surveillance, and Congress should act. And I do not believe that the controls, the opaque agreement, consent agreements as settings are an adequate substitute for fundamental privacy protections for consumers. Now,
Gentlelady's time.
Thank you. I yield back my time.
Gentlelady's time.
Let that stand. And I'd like to ask unanimous consent that I put my constituents' questions in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Guthrie, for...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for being here. When I first got into public office, the internet was really kicking off, and I had a lot of people complain about ads, just the inconvenience of ads, trying to get in the cumbersome of the internet. I remember telling someone one time, being from Kentucky, a basketball fan, I said, there's nothing I hate worse than the 4-minute timeout, the TV timeout. It's flow of the game and everything. But because of the 4-minute timeout, I get to watch the game for free. So that's something I'm willing to accept to move for free. What you're not really willing to accept is that your data's just out there and it's being used. But it's being used in the right way. And it's funny because I was going to ask this question anyway. My friend, I was planning a family trip to Florida, and I searched a town in Florida, and all of a sudden I started getting ads for a brand of hotel that I typically stay in, at a great hotel at the price available to the public because it was on the internet, that I was willing to pay, and stayed there. And so I thought it was actually convenient. Instead of getting just an ad to some place I'll never go, I got an ad specifically to a place I was looking to go, so I thought that was convenient. And it wasn't Facebook, although my wife used Facebook to message my mother-in-law this weekend when we were meeting up, so it's very for free because your business model relies on consumer-driven data. This wasn't Facebook, it was a search engine, but they use consumer-driven data to target an ad to me. So you're not unique in Silicon Valley or in this internet world in doing this type of targeted ads, are you?
No, Congressman, you're right. I mean, this is ad-based business models have been a common way that people have been able to offer free services for a long time. And our social mission of trying to help connect everyone in the world relies on having a service that can be affordable for everyone, that everyone can use. And that's why the ads business model is in service of the social mission that we have. And I think sometimes that gets lost, but I think that's a really important point.
But you're different in that instead of getting just when I'm watching the Hilltoppers on basketball, the person advertising me doesn't know anything about me. I'm just watching the ad. So there's no data, no agreement, or no risk, I guess, there. But with you, there is consumer-driven data. But if we were to greatly reduce or stop, or just greatly reduce through legislation the use of consumer-driven data for targeting ads, what do you think that would do to the internet? And when I say internet, I mean everything, not just Facebook.
Well, Congressman, it would make the ads less relevant. So
if you had less revenue, what would that do to them?
Yeah, it would reduce, it would have a number of effects. For people using the services, it would make the ads less relevant to them. For businesses, like the small businesses that use advertising, it would make advertising more expensive because now they would have to pay more to reach more people and efficiently because targeting helps small businesses be able to afford and reach people as effectively as big companies have typically had the ability to do for a long time. It would affect our revenue some amount too, but I think there are a couple of points here that are lost. One is that we already give people the control to not use that data in ads if they want. Most people don't do that. I think part of the reason for that is that people get that if they are going to see ads, that they want them to be relevant. But the other thing is that a lot of what our business, what makes the ads work, or what makes the business good is just that people are very engaged with Facebook. We have more than 1 billion people who spend almost an hour a day across all our services.
I have 30 seconds, so I appreciate the answer to that. But so I didn't opt out, so forth, and all of a sudden I say, this just doesn't work for me, so I want to delete. You told Congressman Rush that you could delete. What happens to the data? It's there, it's been used, Cambridge Analytica may have it. So what happens when I say, Facebook, take my data off your platform?
If you delete your account, we immediately make it so that your account is no longer available once you're done deleting it. So no one can find you on the service. We wouldn't be able to recreate your account from that. We do have data centers and systems that are redundant, and we have backups in case something bad happens. And over a number of days, we'll we'll go through and make sure that we flush all the content out of the system, but as soon as you delete your account, effectively that content is dismantled, and we wouldn't be able to put your account back together if we wanted.
Gentleman's time.
Well, thank you. My time is expired. I appreciate it.
Recognize the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Sarbanes, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Zuckerberg. I wanted to get something in the record quickly before I move to some questions. You had suggested in your testimony over the last couple of days that Facebook notified the Trump and Clinton campaigns of Russian attempts to hack in to those campaigns, but representatives of both campaigns in the last 24 hours have said that didn't happen. So we're going to need to follow up on that and find out what the real story is.
Do you want me to?
No, I'd like to move on. You can provide a response to that in writing if you would. Let me ask you, is it true that Facebook offered to provide what I guess you refer to as dedicated campaign embeds to both of the presidential campaigns?
Congressman, I can quickly respond to the first point, too.
Just say yes or no. Were there embeds? I need to get to that because I don't have time. Were there embeds in the two campaigns? Were offers of embeds?
Congressman,
yes or no? Were there embeds offered to the Trump campaign and the Clinton campaign?
We offer sales support to every campaign.
Okay, so sales support, I'm going to refer to that as embeds, and I gather that Mr. Trump's campaign ultimately accepted that offer. Is that correct? Yes or no?
Congressman, the Trump campaign had sales support, and
okay, so they had embeds. I'm going to refer to those as embeds. What I'd like you to do, if you could, we're not going to have time for you to do this now, but if you could provide to the committee both the initial offer terms and then any subsequent offer terms that were presented to each candidate in terms of what the embed services would be, that would be very helpful. Do you know how many ads were approved for display on Facebook for each of the presidential candidates by Facebook?
Congressman, I do not, sitting here off the top of my head.
Okay, let me tell you what they were, because I do. President Trump's campaign had an estimated 5.9 million ads approved, and Secretary Clinton 66,000 ads, so that's a delta of about 90 times as much on the Trump campaign, which raises some questions about whether the ad approval processes were maybe not processed correctly or inappropriately bypassed in the final months and weeks of the election by the Trump campaign. And what I'm worried about is that the embeds may have helped to facilitate that. Can you say with absolute certainty that Facebook or any of the Facebook employees working as campaign embeds did not grant any special approval rights to the Trump campaign to allow them to upload a very large number of Facebook ads in that final stretch?
Congressman, we apply the same standard to all campaigns.
Can you say that there were not special approval rights granted? Is that what you're saying? There were not special approval rights granted by any of the embeds or support folks, as you call them, in that Trump campaign?
Congressman,
yes or no?
what I'm saying is
okay.
that we
all
would,
right,
would
if you're
hold
saying
everyone to the
yes,
same standard.
if you're saying yes, then I'll take you at your word. The reason this is important and the reason we need to get to the bottom of it is because it could be a serious problem if these kinds of services were provided beyond what is offered in the normal course, because that could result in violation of campaign finance law, because it would be construed as an in-kind contribution, corporate contribution from Facebook, beyond what the sort of ad buy opportunity would typically provide. The reason I'm asking you these questions is because I'm worried that that embed program has the potential to become a tool for Facebook to solicit favor from policymakers, and that then creates the potential for real conflict of interest. And I think a lot of Americans are waking up to the fact that Facebook is becoming sort of a self-regulated superstructure for political discourse. And the question is, are we, the people, going to regulate our political dialogue, or are you, Mark Zuckerberg, going to end up regulating the political discourse? So we need to be free of that undue influence. I thank you for being here.
Gentleman's time expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Olson, for
Mr.
4
Chairman,
minutes.
Do you mind, for the record, if I just answer the first point for
That's fine.
Take 10
Go
seconds.
ahead.
When I was referring to the campaigns yesterday, I meant the DNC and RNC. So I may have misspoken, and maybe technically that's called the committees, but those were the folks who I was referring to.
Thank you for that clarification. We'll now go to Mr. Olson from Texas for 4 minutes.
I thank the chair. And Mr. Zuckerberg, I know we both wish we met under a different set of circumstances. When the story broke, you were quoted as saying, "I started Facebook. I run it. I'm responsible for what happens here," end quote. You said those same words in your opening statement about an hour and a half ago. I know you believe that in your heart. It's not just some talking points, some canned speech. Because of my 9 years in the Navy, I know the best commanding officers, the best skippers, the best CEOs have that exact same attitude. If Facebook was a Navy ship, your privacy has taken a direct hit. Your trust is severely damaged. You're taking on water, and your future may be a fine with a number per the Washington Post with 4 commas in it. Today, over $1 billion in fines coming your way. As you know, you have to reinforce your words with actions. A few questions about some anomalies that have happened in the past. First of all, back in 2012, apparently, Facebook did an experiment on 689,003 Facebook users. You reduced positive posts from users' friends and limited so-called downer posts from other friends. Basically, fed positive information to one group, another group negative information. The goal was to see how the tone of these posts would affect behavior. I will get in this Forbes article, the LA Times, about illegal human experimentation without permission. I want to talk about that. But it seems that this is disconnecting people. In stark contrast to your mission to connect people. Explain to us how you guys thought this idea was a good idea. Explain with people, give them more negative information, positive information.
Well, Congressman, I view our responsibility as not just building services that people like to use, but making sure that those services are also good for people and good for society overall. At the time, there were a number of questions about whether people seeing content that was either positive or negative on social networks was affecting their mood. And we felt like we had a responsibility to understand whether that was the case, because we don't want to have that effect, right? We don't want to have it so that we want use of social media and our products to be good for people's well-being. And we continually make changes to that effect. Including just recently, this year, we did a number of research projects that showed that when social media is used for building relationships, so when you're interacting with people, it's associated with a lot of positive effects of well-being that you'd expect. It makes you feel more connected, less lonely. It correlates with long-term measures of happiness and health. Whereas if you're using social media or the internet just to passively consume content, then that doesn't have those same positive effects or can even be negative. So we've tried to shift the product more towards helping people interact with friends and family as a result of that. So that's an example of the kind of work that we do.
Well, last question. I believe I've heard you employ 27,000 people thereabouts. Is that correct?
Yes.
I've also been told that about 20,000 of those people, including contractors, do work on data security. Is that correct?
Yes, the 27,000 number is full-time employees, and the security and content review includes contractors, of which there are tens of thousands.
Okay, so roughly at least half your employees are dedicated to security practices. How can Cambridge Analytica happen with so much of your workforce dedicated to these causes? How'd that happen?
Well, Congressman, the issue with Cambridge Analytica and Alexander Kogan happened before we ramped those programs up dramatically. But one thing that I think is important to understand overall is just the sheer volume of content on Facebook makes it so that no amount of people that we can hire will be enough to review all of the content. We need to rely on and build sophisticated AI tools that can help us flag certain content. And we're getting good in certain areas. One of the areas that I mentioned earlier was terrorist content, for example, where we now have AI systems that can identify and take down 99% of the Al-Qaeda and ISIS-related content in our system before a human even flags it to us. I think we need to do more of that.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney, for 4 minutes.
I thank the chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, I thank you for agreeing to testify before the House and Senate committees. I know it's a long and grueling process, and I appreciate your cooperation. I'm a mathematician that spent 20 years in industry and government developing technology, including algorithms. Moreover, my constituents are impacted by these issues, so I'm deeply committed and invested here. I'm going to follow up on an earlier question. Is there currently a place that I can download all of the Facebook information about me, including the websites that I have visited?
Yes, Congressman. We have a download your information tool. We've had it for years. You can go to it in your settings and download all of the content that you have on Facebook.
Well, my staff just this morning downloaded their information and their browsing history is not in there. So are you saying that Facebook does not have browsing history?
Congressman, that would be correct. If we don't have content in there, then that means that you don't have it on Facebook, or you haven't put it there.
So I'm not quite on board with this. Is there any other information that Facebook has obtained about me, whether Facebook collected it or obtained it from a third party, that would not be included in the download?
Congressman, my understanding is that all of your information is included in download your information.
Okay, I'm going to follow up with this afterwards. Mr. Zuckerberg, you indicated that the European users will have GDPR protections on May 25th, and American users will have those similar protections. When will the American users have those protections?
Congressman, we're working on doing that as quickly as possible. I don't have the exact date yet.
So it will not be on May 25th?
We're working on it.
Thank you. Your company and many companies with an online presence have a staggering amount of personal information. The customer is not really in the driver's seat about how their information is used or monetized. The data collectors are in the driver's seat. Today, Facebook is governed by weak federal privacy protections. I've introduced legislation that would help address these issues. The My Data Act would give the FTC rulemaking authority to provide consumers with strong data privacy and security protections. Without this kind of legislation, how can we be sure that Facebook won't continue to be careless with users' information?
Well, Congressman, let me first just set aside that my position isn't that there should be no regulation.
Correct.
But regardless of what the laws are that are in place, we have a very strong incentive to protect people's information. This is the core thing that Facebook is about 100 billion times a day, people come to our service to share a photo or share a message or something.
I mean, I hear you saying this, but the history isn't there. So I think we need to make sure that there's regulations in place to give you the proper motivation to stay in line with data protection. One of the problems here in my mind is that Facebook's history, the privacy, user privacy and security have not been given as high priority as corporate growth, and you've admitted as much. Is Facebook considering changing its management structure to ensure that privacy and security have sufficient priority to prevent these problems in the future?
Congressman, this is an incredibly high priority for us. When I was saying before that the core use of the product every day, about 100 billion times, is that people come and try to share something with a specific set of people, that works because people have confidence that if they send a message, it's going to go to the person that they want. If they want to share a photo with their friends, it's going to go to the people who they want. That's incredibly important. We've built a robust privacy program. We have a chief privacy officer.
That's a little bit off track from what I'm trying to get at. The privacy protections clearly failed in a couple of cases that are high profile right now. And part of the blame that seems to be out there is that the management structure for privacy and security don't have the right level of profile in Facebook to get your attention to make sure that they get the proper resources.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. McKinley, for 4 minutes.
Thank you for coming, Mr. Zuckerberg. I've got a yes or no question, if you could give that. Should Facebook enable illegal online pharmacies to sell drugs such as oxycodone, Percocet, Vicodin without a prescription?
Congressman, I believe that's against our policies.
Yes or no? Do you think you should be able to do that?
No, of course not.
And there are 35,000 online pharmacies operating, and according to the FDA, they think there may be 96% of them are operating illegally. But on November of last year, CNBC had an article say that you were surprised by the breadth of this opioid crisis. And as you can see from these photographs, opioids are still available on your site, that they're without a prescription on your site. So it contradicts just what you just said just a minute ago. And it went on last week, FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb has testified before our office, said that the internet firms simply aren't taking practical steps to find and remove these illegal opioid listings. And he specifically mentioned Facebook. Are you aware of that? His quote?
Congressman,
Yes,
I'm not
yes or no?
specifically aware of his quote, but I heard that he said something. And let me just speak to this for a second.
If I could, no, we don't. So in your opening statement, and I appreciated your remark, you said it's not enough to give people a voice. We have to make sure that people aren't using it, Facebook, to hurt people. Now, America's in the midst of one of the worst epidemics that it's ever experienced with this drug epidemic. And it's all across this country. It's not just in West Virginia. But your platform is still being used to circumvent the law and allow people to buy highly addictive drugs without a prescription. You know, with all due respect, Facebook is actually enabling an illegal activity, and in so doing, you are hurting people. Would you agree with that statement?
Congressman, I think that there are a number of areas of content that we need to do a better job policing on our service. Today, the primary way that content regulation works here and review is that people can share what they want openly on the service, and then if someone sees an issue, they can flag it to us, and then we will review it. Over time, we're shifting to a mode
you can
where
find
we're
out,
building...
Mr. Zuckerberg, you know which pharmacies are operating legally and illegally, but you're still continuing to take that, allow that to be posted on Facebook, and allow people to get this scourge, this ravaging this country, is being enabled because of Facebook. So my question to you as we close on this, you've said before you were going to take down those ads, but you didn't do it. We've got statement after statement about things. You're going to take those down within days, and they haven't gone down. That, what I just put up, was just from yesterday. It's still up. So my question to you is, when are you going to take down these posts that are done with illegal digital pharmacies? When are you going to take them down?
Congressman, right now, when people report the post to us, we will take them down and have people review.
Why do they have to, if you've got all these 20,000 people, you know that they're up there. Where's your requirement? Where's your accountability to allow this to be occurring, this ravaging this country?
Congressman, I agree that this is a terrible issue, and respectfully, when there are tens of billions or 100 billion pieces of content that are shared every day, even 20,000 people reviewing it can't look at everything. What we need to do is build more AI tools that can proactively find that content.
You've been said before you were going to take them down, and you haven't. And they're
Gentleman's
still up.
time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welch, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, you acknowledged candidly that Facebook made a mistake. You did an analysis of how it happened. You promised action. We're at the point where the action will speak much louder than the words. But Mr. Chairman, this Congress has made a mistake. This event that happened, whether it was Facebook or some other platform, was foreseeable and inevitable. And we did nothing about it. Congresswoman Blackburn and I had a group, a privacy working group, 6 meetings with many of the industry players. There was an acknowledgement on both sides that privacy was not being protected, that there was no reasonable safeguard for Americans' privacy, but there was an inability to come to a conclusion. So we also have an obligation. And in an effort to move forward, Mr. Zuckerberg, I've framed some questions that hopefully will allow a reasonable yes or no answer to see if there's some common ground to achieve the goal you assert you have, and we certainly have, the obligation to protect the privacy of American consumers. First, do you believe that consumers have a right to know and control what personal data companies collect from them?
Yes.
Do you believe that consumers have a right to control how and with whom their personal information is shared with third parties?
Congressman, yes, of course.
And do you believe that consumers have a right to secure and responsible handling of their personal data?
Yes, Congressman.
And do you believe that consumers should be able to easily place limits on the personal data that companies collect and retain?
Congressman, that seems like a reasonable principle to me.
Okay, and do you believe that consumers should be able to correct or delete inaccurate personal data that companies have obtained?
Congressman, that one might be more interesting to debate. Because
well, then you get back to us with specifics on that. I think they do have that right. Do you believe that consumers should be able to have their data deleted immediately from Facebook when they stop using the service?
Yes, Congressman, and they have that ability.
Good. And do you believe that the Federal Trade Commission or another properly resourced governmental agency with rulemaking authority should be able to determine on a regular basis what is considered personal information to provide certainty for consumers and companies what information needs to be protected most tightly?
Congressman, I certainly think that that's an area where we should discuss some sort of oversight.
There's not a big discussion here. Who gets the final say? Is it the private market, companies like yours, or is there a governmental function here that defines what privacy is?
Congressman, I think this is an area where some regulation makes sense. You proposed a very specific thing, and I think the details matter.
Let me ask you this. I've appreciated your testimony. Will you work with this committee to help put us, to help the U.S. put in place our own privacy regulation that prioritizes consumers' right to privacy, just as the EU has done?
Congressman, yes, I'll make sure that we work with you to flesh this out.
All right, and you have indicated that Facebook has not always protected the privacy of their users throughout the company's history. And it seems, though, from your answers, that you agree that consumers do have a fundamental right to privacy that empowers them to control the collection, the use, the sharing of their personal information online. And Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, privacy cannot be based just on company policies, whether it's Facebook or any other company. There has to be a willingness on the part of this Congress to step up and provide policy protection to the privacy rights of every American consumer. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Kinzinger,
Thank you,
for
Chairman.
4 minutes.
Mr. Zuckerberg, thank you for being here. Given the global reach of Facebook, I'd like to know about the company's policies and practices with respect to information sharing with foreign governments, if you don't mind. What personal data does Facebook make available from Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp to Russian state agencies, including intel and security agencies?
Congressman, in general, the way we approach data and law enforcement is if we have knowledge of imminent harm, physical harm that might happen to someone, we try to reach out to local law enforcement in order to help prevent that. I think that is less built out around the world. It is more built out in the U.S. So, for example, on that example, we built out specific programs in the U.S. We have 3,000 people that are focused on making sure that if we detect that someone is at risk of harming themselves, we can get them the appropriate help.
What about Russian intel agencies?
The second category of information is when there is a valid legal process served to us. In general, if a government puts something out that's overly broad, we're going to fight back on it. We view our duty as protecting people's information, but if there is valid service, especially in the U.S., we will, of course, work with law enforcement. In general, we are not in the business of providing a lot of information to the Russian government.
Do you know, is this data only from accounts located in or operated from these individual countries, or does it include Facebook's global data?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, is the data only from the accounts located in or operated from those countries in terms of Russia or anything, or does it include Facebook's global data?
Well, Congressman, in general, countries do not have jurisdiction to have any valid legal reason to request data of someone outside of their country. But
well, where is it stored? Where's the data? I mean, do they have access to data only?
We don't store any data in Russia.
Okay, so it's the global data.
Yeah.
So let me just ask, you mentioned a few times that we're in an arms race with Russia, but is it one-sided if Facebook, as an American-based company, is given the opposition everything it needs in terms of, where it's storing its data?
Sorry, Congressman, could you repeat that?
So you mentioned a few times that we're in an arms race with Russia.
Yes.
If you're giving Russian intelligence service agencies, potentially even on a valid request, access to global data that's not in Russia, is that kind of a disadvantage to us and an advantage to them?
Congressman, let me be more precise in my testimony.
Yeah, please.
I have no specific knowledge of any data that we've ever given to Russia. In general, we'll work with valid law enforcement requests in different countries, and we can get back to you on what that might mean with Russia specifically, but I have no knowledge sitting here of any time that we would have given them information.
That'd be great. Now, I've got another unique one I want to bring up. So I was just today, and I'm not saying this as a woe is me, but I think this happens to a lot of people. There have been, my pictures have been stolen and used in fake accounts all around, and in many cases, people have been extorted for money. We report it when we can, but we're in a tail chase. In fact, today, I just Googled, or I just put on your website Andrew Kinzinger, and he looks a lot like me, but it says he's from London and lives in LA and went to Locke High School, which isn't anything like me at all. These accounts pop up a lot, and again, it's using my pictures but extorting people for money. And we hear about it from people that call and say, hey, I was duped or whatever. I know you can't control everything. I mean, you have a huge platform, but can you talk about maybe some movements into the future to try to prevent that in terms of maybe recognizing somebody's picture and if it's fake?
Yes, Congressman, this is an important issue, and I mean, fake accounts overall are a big issue because that's how a lot of the other issues that we see around fake news and foreign election interference are happening as well. So long-term, the solution here is to build more AI tools that find patterns of people using the services that no real person would do. And we've been able to do that in order to take down tens of thousands of accounts, especially related to election interference leading up to the French election, the German election, and last year the US-Alabama Senate election, special election. And that's an area where we should be able to extend that work and develop more AI tools that can do this more broadly.
Gentleman's time's
Thank you.
expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Lujan, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to pick up where Mr. Kinzinger dropped off here. Mr. Zuckerberg, Facebook recently announced that a search feature allowing malicious actors to scrape data on virtually all of Facebook's 2 billion users. Yes or no? In 2013, Brandon Copley, the CEO of Giftnix, demonstrated that this feature could easily be used to gather information at scale. Well, the answer to that question is yes. Yes or no, this issue of scraping data was again raised in 2015 by a cybersecurity researcher, correct?
Congressman, I'm not specifically familiar with that. The feature that we identified, I think it was a few weeks ago or a couple weeks ago at this point, was a search feature that allowed people to look up some information that people had publicly shared on their profile. So names, profile pictures,
If I may, Mr. Zuckerberg, I will recognize that Facebook did turn this feature off. My question, and the reason I'm asking about 2013 and 2015, is Facebook knew about this in 2013 and 2015, but you didn't turn the feature off until Wednesday of last week. It's the same feature that Mr. Kinzinger just talked about, where this is essentially a tool for these malicious actors to go and steal someone's identity and put the finishing touches on it. So again, one of your mentors, Roger McNamee, recently said your business is based on trust and you're losing trust. This is a trust question. Why did it take so long, especially when we're talking about some of the other pieces that we get to the bottom of? Your failure to act on this issue has made billions of people potentially vulnerable to identity theft and other types of harm from malicious actors. So on to another subject. Facebook has detailed profiles on people who have never signed up for Facebook, yes or no?
Congressman, in general, we collect data of people who have not signed up for Facebook for security purposes to prevent the kind of scraping that you were just referring to.
So these are called shadow profiles? Is that what they've been referred to by some?
Congressman, I'm not familiar with that.
I'll refer to them as shadow profiles for today's hearing. On average, how many data points does Facebook have on each Facebook user?
I do not know off the top of my head.
So the average for non-Facebook platforms is 1,500. It's been reported that Facebook has as many as 29,000 data points for an average Facebook user. Do you know how many points of data that Facebook has on the average non-Facebook user?
Congressman, I do not off the top of my head, but I can have our team get back to you afterwards.
I appreciate that. It's been admitted by Facebook that you do collect data points on non-average users. So my question is, can someone who does not have a Facebook account opt out of Facebook's involuntary data collection?
Congressman, anyone can turn off and opt out of any data collection for ads, whether they use our services or not. But in order to prevent people from scraping public information, which again, the search feature that you brought up only showed public information, people's names and profiles and things that they'd made public, but nonetheless, we don't want people aggregating even public information.
But
we try to block that. So we need to know when someone is trying to repeatedly access our services.
If I may, Mr. Zuckerberg, so I'm about out of time. It may surprise you that we've not talked about this a lot today. You've said everyone controls their data, but you're collecting data on people that are not even Facebook users, that have never signed a consent, a privacy agreement, and you're collecting their data. And it may surprise you that on Facebook's page, when you go to I don't have a Facebook account and would like to request all my personal data stored by Facebook, it takes you to a form that says go to your Facebook page, and then on your account settings, you can download your data. So you're directing people that don't have access, don't even have a Facebook page, to have to sign up for a page to release their data. We've got to fix that. The last question that I have is, have you disclosed to this committee or to anyone all information Facebook has uncovered about Russian interference on your platform?
Congressman, we are working with the right authorities on that, and I'm happy to answer specific questions here as well.
Gentleman's time's expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith, for 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you being here. Let me state up front that I share the privacy concerns that you've heard from a lot of us, and I appreciate your statements and willingness to, help us figure out a solution that's good for the American people. So I appreciate that. Secondly, I have to say that it's my understanding that yesterday Senator Shelley Moore Capito, my friend in my neighboring state of West Virginia, asked you about Facebook's plans with rural broadband, and you agreed to share that information with her at some point in time, get her up to date and up to speed. I was excited to hear that you were excited about that and passionate about it. My district is very similar to West Virginia as it borders it, and we have a lot of rural areas. Can you also agree, yes or no, to update me on that when the information is available?
Yes, Congressman. We will certainly follow up with you on this. Part of the mission of connecting everyone around the world means that everyone needs to be able to be on the internet. And unfortunately, too much of the internet infrastructure today is too expensive for the current business models of carriers to support a lot of rural communities with the quality of service that they deserve. So we are building a number of specific technologies, from planes that can beam down internet access to repeaters and mesh networks, to make it so that all these communities can be served, and we'd be happy to follow up with you on this. I
appreciate that, and we've got a lot of drone activity going on in our district, whether it's the University of Virginia at Wise or Virginia Tech, so we'd be happy to help out there too. Let me switch gears. You talked about trying to ferret out misinformation, and the question becomes, who decides what is misinformation? So when some of my political opponents put on the Facebook that they think Morgan Griffith is a bum, I think that's misinformation. What say you?
Congressman, without weighing in on that specific piece of content, let me outline the way that we approach fighting fake news in general. There are 3 categories of fake news that we fight. One are basically spammers. They're economic actors like the Macedonian trolls that I think we've all heard about. Basically folks who don't have an ideological goal. They're just trying to write the most sensational thing they can in order to get people to click on it so they can make money on ads. It's all economics. So the way to fight that is we make it so that they can't run our ads, they can't make money. We make it so that we can detect what they're doing and show it less in newsfeed so they can make less money. When they stop making money, they just go and do something else because they're economically inclined. The second category are basically state actors, right? So what we've found with Russian interference, and those people are setting up fake accounts. So for that, we need to build AI systems that can go and identify a number of their fake account networks. And just last week, we traced back the Russian activity to specific fake account network that Russia had in Russia, to influence Russian culture and other Russian-speaking countries around them. And we took down a number of their fake accounts and pages, including a news organization that was sanctioned by the Russian government as a Russian state news organization. So that's a pretty big action, but removing fake accounts is the other way that we can stop the spread of false information.
I appreciate that. My time is running. I do want to point this out, though, as part of that, who's going to decide what is misinformation. We've heard about the Catholic University and the cross. We've heard about a candidate. We've heard about the conservative ladies. A firearm shop, lawful in my district, had a similar problem. It has also been corrected. And so I wonder if the industry has thought about, not only are we looking at it, but has the industry thought about doing something like Underwriters Laboratories, which was set up when electricity was new to determine whether or not the devices were safe. Have you all thought about doing something like that so it's not Facebook alone, but the industry saying, wait a minute, this is probably misinformation, and setting up guidelines that everybody can agree are fair?
Yes, Congressman. That's actually the third category that I was going to get to next after economic spammers and state actors with fake accounts. One of the things that we're doing is working with a number of third parties so if people flag things as false news or incorrect, we run them by third-party fact checkers who are all accredited by this Poynter Institute of Journalism. There are firms of all leanings around this who do this work, and that's an important part of the effort.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko, for 4 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Zuckerberg, I want to follow up on a question asked by Mr. McNerney, where he talked about visiting websites and the fact that Facebook can track you. And as you visit those websites, you can have that deleted. I'm informed that there's not a way to do that, or are you telling us that you're announcing a new policy?
Congressman, my understanding is that if we have information from you visiting other places, then you have a way of getting access to that and deleting it and making sure that we don't store it anymore. In the specific question that the other congressman asked, I think it's possible that we just didn't have the information that he was asking about in the first place, and that's why it wasn't there.
Well, 3 billion user accounts were breached at Yahoo in 2013, 145 million at eBay in 2014, 143 million at Equifax in 2017, 78 million at Anthem in 2015, 76 million at JP Morgan Chase in 2014. The list goes on and on. The security of all that private data is gone, likely sold many times over to the highest bidder on the dark web. We live in an information age. Data breaches and privacy hacks are not a question of if, they are a question of when. But the case with Facebook is slightly different. The 87 million accounts extracted by Cambridge Analytica are just the beginning, with likely dozens of other third parties that have accessed this information. As far as we know, the dam is still broken. As you have noted, Mr. Zuckerberg, Facebook's business model is based on capitalizing on the private personal information of your users. Data security should be a central pillar of this model. And with your latest vast breach of privacy and the widespread political manipulation that followed it, the question this committee must ask itself is what role the federal government should play in protecting the American people and the democratic institutions that your platform and others like it have put at risk. In this case, you gave permission to mine the data of some 87 million users based on the deceptive consent of just a fraction of that number. When they found out I was going to be speaking with you today, my constituents asked me to share some of their concerns in person. How can they protect themselves on your platform? Why should they trust you again with their likes, their loves, their lives? Users trusted Facebook to prioritize user privacy and data security, and that trust has been shattered. I'm encouraged that Facebook is committed to making changes, but I am indeed wary that you are only acting now out of concern for your brand and only making changes that should have been made a long time ago. You have described this as an arms race, but every time we saw what precautions you have, or in most cases have not taken, your company is caught unprepared and ready to issue another apology. I'm left wondering again why Congress should trust you again. We'll be watching you closely to ensure that Facebook follows through on these commitments. Many of my constituents have asked about your business model, where users are the product. Mary of Half Moon in my district called it infuriating. Andy of Schenectady New York asked, why doesn't Facebook pay its users for their incredibly valuable data? Facebook claims that users rightly own and control their data, yet their data keeps being exposed on your platform, and these breaches cause more and more harm each time. You have said that Facebook was built to empower its users. Instead, users are having their information abused with absolutely no recourse. In light of this harm, what liability should Facebook have? When users' data is mishandled, who is responsible and what recourse do users have? Do you bear that liability?
Congressman, I think we're responsible for protecting people's information for sure. But one thing that you said that I want to provide some clarity on.
Do you bear the liability?
Well, you said earlier, you referenced that you thought that we were only taking action after this came to light. Actually, we made significant changes to the platform in 2014 that would have made this incident with Cambridge Analytica impossible to happen again today. I wish we'd made those changes a couple of years earlier because this poll app got people to use it back in 2013 and 2014. And if we had made the changes a couple of years earlier, then we would have.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes.
Mr. Chairman, if I might ask that other questions that my constituents have be entered by unanimous consent.
Without objection, of course. That goes for all members. Chair recognizes gentleman from Florida, Mr. Bilirakis, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it, and thanks for your testimony, Mr. Zuckerberg. Well, first of all, I wanted to follow up with Mr. McKinley's testimony. This is bad stuff, Mr. Zuckerberg, with regard to the illegal online pharmacies. When are those ads? I mean, when are you going to take those off? I think we need an answer to that. I think they need to get off. We need to get these off as soon as possible. Can you give us an answer, a clear answer as to when these pharmacies? We have an epidemic here with regard to the opioids. I think we're owed a clear answer, a definitive answer as to when these ads will be offline.
Congressman, if people flag those ads for us, we will take them down now.
Now?
Yes.
By the end of the day?
If people flag them for us, we will look at them as quickly as we can.
Well, you have knowledge now, obviously. You have knowledge. You have knowledge of those ads. Will you begin to take them down today?
The ads that are flagged for us, we will review and take down if they violate our policies, which I believe the ones that you're talking about do.
They clearly do. If they're illegal, they clearly violate your policy.
Which they do. But what I think really needs to happen here is not just us reviewing content that gets flagged for us. We need to be able to build tools that can proactively go out and identify what might be these ads for opioids before people even have to flag them for us to review.
I agree.
And that's going to be a longer-term thing in order to build that solution. So, but today, if someone flags the ads for us, we will take them down.
Work on those tools as soon as possible, please. Okay, next question. A constituent of mine in District 12 of Florida, the Tampa Bay area, came to me recently with what was a clear violation of your privacy policy. In this case, a third-party organization publicly posted personal information about my constituent on his Facebook page. This included his home address, voting record, degrading photos, and other information. In my opinion, this is cyberbullying. For weeks, my constituent tried reaching out to Facebook on multiple occasions through its report feature, but the offending content remained. It was only when my office got involved that the posts were removed almost immediately for violating Facebook policy. How does Facebook's self-reporting policy work to prevent misuse, and why did it take an act of Congress, a member of Congress, to get, again, a clear privacy violation removed from Facebook? If you can answer that question, I'd appreciate it, please.
Congressman, that clearly sounds like a big issue and something that would violate our policies. I don't have specific knowledge of that case, but what I imagine happened, given what you just said, is they reported it to us, and one of the people who reviews content probably made an enforcement error. And then when you reached out, we probably looked at it again and realized that it violated the policies and took it down. We have a number of steps that we need to take to improve the accuracy of our enforcement.
Absolutely.
That's a big issue. We need
has
to
to
get
be
to content
consistency.
faster, and we need to be able to do better at this. I think the same solution to the opioid question that you raised earlier of doing more with automated tools will lead to both faster response times and more accurate enforcement of the policies.
Can you give us a timeline as to when will this be done? I mean, this is very critical for our, I mean, listen, my family uses Facebook, my friends, my constituents, we all use Facebook. I use Facebook. It's wonderful for our seniors to connect with their relatives.
Gentleman's time.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can I submit for the record my additional questions?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank
No
you so much,
objection.
Mr.
Chair
Chairman.
recognizes gentlelady from New York, Ms. Clark, for 4 minutes.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for coming before us, Mr. Zuckerman. Today, I want to take the opportunity to represent the concerns of the newly formed Tech Accountability Caucus, in which I serve as a co-chair with my colleagues, Representative Robin Kelly, Congressman Emmanuel Cleaver, and Congresswoman Bonnie Watson-Coleman. But most importantly, people in our country and around the globe who are in vulnerable populations, including those who look just like me. My first question to you is, as you may be aware, there have been numerous media reports about how more than 3,000 Russian ads were bought on Facebook to incite racial and religious division and chaos in the U.S. during the 2016 election. Those ads specifically characterized and weaponized African-American groups like Black Lives Matter, in which ads suggested through propaganda or fake news, as people call it these days, that they were a rising threat. Do you think that the lack of diversity, culturally competent personnel in your C-suite and throughout your organization, in which your company did not detect or disrupt and investigate these claims, are a problem in this regard?
Congresswoman, I agree that we need to work on diversity. In this specific case, I don't think that that was the issue, because we were frankly slow to identifying the whole Russian misinformation operation and not just that specific example. Going forward, we're going to address this by verifying the identity of every single advertiser who's running political or issue-oriented ads, to make it so that foreign actors or people trying to spoof their identity or say that they're someone that they're not cannot run political ads or run large pages of the type that
So whether they were Russian or not, when you have propaganda, how are you addressing that? Because this was extremely harmful during the last election cycle and can continue to be so in the upcoming elections and throughout the year, right? I'm concerned that there are not eyes that are culturally competent looking at these things and being able to see how this would impact on civil society. If everyone within the organization is monolithic, then you can miss these things very easily. And we've talked about diversity forever with your organization. What can you say today when you look at how all of this operates, that you can do immediately to make sure that we have the types of viewing or reviewing that could enable us to catch this in its tracks?
Congresswoman, we announced a change in how we're going to review ads and big pages, so that now, going forward, we're going to verify the identity and location of every advertiser who's running political or issue ads, or and the identities.
Good. We'd like you to get back to us with a timeline on that.
Oh, that will be in place for these elections.
Okay, fabulous. When Mr. Kogan sold the Facebook-based data that he acquired through the Quiz app to Cambridge Analytica, did he violate Facebook's policies at the time?
Yes, Congresswoman.
When the Obama campaign collected millions of Facebook users' data through their own app during the 2012 election, did it violate Facebook's policies at the time?
No, Congresswoman, it did not.
I hope you understand that this distinction provides little comfort to those of us concerned about our privacy online. Regardless of political party, Americans desperately need to be protected. Democrats on this committee have
Gentlelady's
been calling for
time.
strong privacy and data security legislation for years. And we really can't wait, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady's
I yield back.
time's
Thank you,
expired.
Mr. Zuckerberg.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you,
for
Mr.
4
Chairman.
minutes.
Mr. Zuckerberg, thanks for joining us today. Let me add my name to the list of folks that you're going to get back to on the rural broadband internet access question. Please add my name to that list.
Of course.
I got a lot of those folks in my district. You know, you're a real American success story. There's no question that you and Facebook have revolutionized the way Americans, in fact, the world, communicate and interconnect with one another. I think one of the reasons that you were able to do that is because nowhere other than here in America, where a young man in college can pursue his dreams and ambitions on his own terms without a big federal government over-regulating them and telling them what they can and cannot do, could you have achieved something like this. But in the absence of federal regulations that would reel that in, the only way it works for the betterment of society and people is with a high degree of responsibility and trust. And you've acknowledged that there have been some breakdowns in responsibility. I think sometimes, and I'm a technology guy. I have 2 degrees in computer science. I'm a software engineer. I'm a patent holder. So I know the challenges that you face in terms of managing the technology. But oftentimes technology folks spend so much time thinking about what they can do and little time thinking about what they should do. And so I want to talk about some of those should do kind of things. You heard earlier about faith-based material that had been taken down, ads that had been taken down. You admitted that it was a mistake. That was in my district, by the way, Franciscan University. A faith-based university was the one that did that. How is your content filtered and determined to be appropriate or not appropriate and policy compliant? Is it an algorithm that does it, or is there a team of a gazillion people that sit there and look at each and every ad that make that determination?
Congressman, it's a combination of both. So at the end of the day, we have community standards that are written out and try to be very clear about what is acceptable. And we have a large team of people. As I said, by the end of this year, we're going to have about more than 20,000 people working on security and content review across the company. But in order to flag some content quickly, we also build technical systems in order to take things down. So if we see terrorist content, for example, we'll flag that and we can take that down.
What do you do when you find someone or something that's made a mistake? I mean, I've heard you say several times today that you know a mistake has been made. What kind of accountability is there when mistakes are made? Because every time a mistake like that is made, it's a little bit of a chip away from the trust and the responsibility factors. How do you hold people accountable in Facebook when they make those kind of mistakes of taking stuff down that shouldn't be taken down or leaving stuff up that should not be left up?
Congressman, for content reviewers specifically, their performance is going to be measured by whether they do their job accurately. And
you ever fire anybody when they do stuff like that?
I'm sure we do. As part of the normal course of running a company, you're hiring and firing people all the time to grow your capacity and
what happened to the person that took down the Franciscan University ad and didn't put it back up until the media started getting involved?
Congressman, I'm not specifically aware of that case.
Can you take that question for me? My time has expired. Can you take that question for me and get me that answer back, please?
We will.
Okay, thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Loebsack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and the ranking member for holding this hearing today, and I want to thank Mr. Zuckerberg for being here today as well. Add my name to the rural broadband list as well. I have 1/4 of Iowa, the southeast part of Iowa. We definitely need more help on that front. Thank you. You may recall last year, Mr. Zuckerberg, that you set out to visit every state in the country to meet different people. And one of those places you visited was, in fact, Iowa, my home state of Iowa, and you did visit the district that I proudly represent, and you met some of my constituents. As you began your tour, you said that you believed in connecting the world and giving everyone a voice, and that, quote, you wanted, quote, to personally hear more of those voices. I'm going to do the same thing in just a second that a number of my colleagues did and just ask you some questions that were submitted to my Facebook page by some of my constituents. I do want to say at the outset, though, and I do ask for unanimous consent to enter all those questions into the record, Mr. Chair.
Without objection.
I think trust has been the issue today. There's no question about it. I think that's what I'm hearing from my constituents. That's what we're hearing from our colleagues. That's really the question. How can we be guaranteed that, for example, when you agree to some things today, that you're going to follow through and that we're going to be able to hold you accountable, and without perhaps constructing too many rules and regulations. We'd like to keep that to a minimum if we possibly can, but I do understand that you have agreed that we're going to have some rules and regulations so that we can protect people's privacy, so that we can protect that use of the consumer data. So going forward from there, I've just got a few questions I'll probably have an opportunity to get to. The first one goes to the business model issue, because you're publicly traded, is that correct?
Yes.
And you're the CEO?
Yes.
Right. And so I've got Lauren from Solon who asks, is it possible for Facebook to exist without collecting and selling our data? Is it possible to exist?
Congressman, we don't sell people's data. So I think that that's an important thing to clarify up front. And then in terms of collecting data, I mean, the whole purpose of the service is that you can share the things that you want with the people around you, right, and your friends. So
is it possible for you to be in business without sharing the data, because that's what you have done, whether it was selling or not, sharing the data, providing it to Cambridge Analytica and other folks along the way? Is it possible for your business to exist without doing that?
Well, Congressman, it would be possible for our business to exist without having a developer platform. It would not be possible for our business to, or our products or our services or anything that we do to exist without having the opportunity for people to go to Facebook, put in the content that they want to share and who they want to share it with, and then go do that. That's the core thing.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And then Brenda from Muscatine, she has a question obviously related to trust as well, and that is, how will changes promised this time be proven to be completed? She'd like to know, how's that going to happen? If there are changes, you said there have been some changes, how can she and those folks in our districts and throughout America, not just members of Congress, but how can folks in our districts hold you accountable? How do they know that those changes are in fact going to happen? That's what that question's about.
Congressman, for the developer platform changes that we announced, they're implemented. We're putting those into place. We announced a bunch of specific things. It's on our blog, and I wrote it in my written testimony, and that stuff is happening. We're also going back and investigating every single app that had access to a large amount of data before we locked down the platform in the past. We will tell people if we find anything that misused their data, and we will tell people when the investigation is complete.
Thank you. And finally, Chad from Scott County wants to know, who has my data other than Cambridge Analytica?
Congressman, part of what I just said is that we're going to do an investigation of every single app that had access to a large amount of people's data. If you signed into another app, then that app probably has access to some of your data. And part of the investigation that we're going to do is to determine whether those app developers did anything improper, shared that data further beyond that. And if we find anything like that, we will tell people that their data was misused.
All right, thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Long, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being here today. On a voluntary basis, I want to put that out here. You were not subpoenaed to be here, as Mr. Barton offered up a little bit ago. You're the only witness at the table today. We've had 10 people at that table. To give you an idea of what kind of hearings we've had in here, not too long ago we had 10. And I'd say that if we invited everyone that had read your terms of agreement, terms of service, we could probably fit them at that table. I also would say that I represent 751,000 people, and out of that 751,000 people, the people in my area that are really worked up about this Facebook and about this hearing today would also fit with you there at the table. So I'm not getting the outcry from my constituents about what's going on with Cambridge Analytica and this user agreement and everything else. But there are some things that I think you need to be concerned about. One question I'd like to ask before I go into my questioning is, what was Face Smash, and is it still up and running?
No, Congressman. Face Smash was a prank website that I launched in college, in my dorm room, before I started Facebook. There was a movie about this, or it said it was about this. It was of unclear truth. And that claimed that Face Smash was somehow connected to the development of Facebook. It isn't. It wasn't.
Just
and Face Smash
coincidental.
isn't running.
The timing was the same, right? Just coincidental?
It was in 2003.
Okay.
And I
this
took it
was how you
down,
would
and
rate
it
women?
actually has nothing to do with
You
Facebook.
put up pictures of two women and decide which one was the better, more attractive of the two, is that right?
Congressman, that is an accurate description of the prank website that I made when I was a sophomore in college.
But from that beginning, whether it was actually the beginning of Facebook or not, you've come a long way. Jan Schakowsky, Congressman Schakowsky this morning said self-regulation simply does not work. Mr. Butterfield, Representative Butterfield, said that you need more African-American inclusion on your board of directors. If I was you, a little bit of advice, Congress is good at two things: doing nothing and overreacting. So far, we've done nothing on Facebook. Since your inception in that Harvard dorm room those many years ago, we've done nothing on Facebook. We're getting ready to overreact. So just take that as a shot across the bow warning to you. You've got a good outfit there on your front row behind you, that very bright folks. You're Harvard educated. I have a Yale hat that cost me $160,000. That's as close as I ever got to an Ivy League school. But I'd like to show you right now a little picture here. You recognize these folks?
I do.
Who are they?
I believe, is that Diamond and Silk?
That is Diamond and Silk, two biological sisters from North Carolina. I might point out they're African American. And their content was deemed by your folks to be unsafe. So, you know, I don't know what type of a picture this is, if it was taken in a police station or what, in a lineup, but apparently they've been deemed unsafe. Diamond and Silk have a question for you, and that question is, what is unsafe about two black women supporting President Donald J. Trump?
Well, Congressman, nothing is unsafe about that. The specifics of this situation, I'm not as up to speed on as I probably would be if I didn't have a hearing that I...
You have 20,000 employees, as you said, to check content, and I would suggest, as good as you are with analytics, that those 20,000 people, you do some analytical research and see how many conservative websites have been pulled down and how many liberal websites. One of our talk show hosts at home, Nick Reed, this morning on the radio said that if Diamond and Silk were liberal, they'd be on the late night talk show circuit back and forth. They're humorous, they have their opinion, not that you have to agree or that I have to agree, do agree, don't agree with them. But the fact that they're conservative, and I just remember, if you don't remember anything else from this hearing here today, remember, we do nothing and we overreact. And we're getting ready to overreact, so I would suggest you go home and review all these other things people have accused you of today. Get with your good team, they're behind you. You're the guy to fix this. We're not. You need to save your ship. Thank you.
Gentleman's time
Mr.
is
Chairman,
expired.
since my name was mentioned, can I just respond?
I tell you, if we could move on, just because we're going to run out of time for members down dais to be able to ask their questions.
Okay, I mean, I consider Billy Long a good friend. Let me just say that I don't think it was a breach of decorum, and I just take issue with his saying that a very modest bill that I've introduced is an overreach. That's all.
I didn't say it was an overreach. All I said was that I would just remind you of several.
Now recognize the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Schrader, for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Mr. Zuckerberg, again, thank you for being here. Appreciate your good offices and voluntarily coming before us. You have testified that you voluntarily took Cambridge Analytica's word that they had deleted information, found out subsequently that they did not delete that information, have sent in your own forensics team, which I applaud. I just want to make sure and get some questions answered here. Can you tell us that they were told not to destroy any data, misappropriated data they may find?
Congressman, so you're right that in 2015, when we found out that the app developer Alexander Kogan had sold data to Cambridge Analytica. We reached out to them. At that point, we demanded that they delete all the data that they had. They told us at that point that they had done that. And then a month ago, we heard a new report that said that, that they actually hadn't done that.
But I'm talking about the direction you've given your forensic team. Now, if they find stuff, they're not to delete it at this point in time, or are they going to go ahead and delete it?
The audit team that we are sending in.
Right.
The first order of business is to understand exactly what happened. And
I'm worried about the information being deleted without law enforcement having the opportunity to actually review that. Will you commit to this committee that neither Facebook nor its agents have removed any information or evidence from Cambridge Analytica's offices?
Congressman, I do not believe that we have. And
how about Mr. Kogan's office, if I may ask?
One specific point on this is that our audit of Cambridge Analytica, we've paused that in order to cede to the UK government, which is conducting its own government audit, which of course, an investigation, which of course takes precedence.
With all due respect, what I'm getting at is I'd like to have the information available for the UK or US law enforcement officials, and I did not hear you commit to that. Will you commit to the committee that Facebook has not destroyed any data or records that may be relevant to any federal, state, or international law enforcement investigation?
Congressman, yes. What I'm saying is that the UK government is going to complete its investigation before we go in and do our audit, so they will have full access to all the information. So
you've suspended your audit pending the UK's investigation?
Yes, we've paused it pending theirs.
So it's my understanding that you and other Facebook executives have the ability to rescind or delete messages that are on people's websites. To be clear, I just want to make sure that if that is indeed the case, that after you've deleted that information, that somehow law enforcement, particularly relevant to this case, would still have access to those messages.
Congressman, yes. We have a document retention policy of the company where for some people we delete emails after a period of time, but we, of course, preserve anything that there's a legal hold on.
Great. Well, I appreciate that. While you've testified very clearly that you do not sell information, it's not Facebook's model. You do the advertising and obviously have other means of revenue. But it's pretty clear others do sell that information. Doesn't that make you somewhat complicit in what they're doing? You're allowing them to sell the information that they glean from your website?
Well, Congressman, I would disagree that we allow it. We actually expressly prohibit any developer that people
How do you enforce that? That's my concern. How do you enforce that? Complaint only is what I've heard so far tonight.
Yes, Congressman. Some of it is in response to reports that we get, and some of it is we do spot checks to make sure that the apps are actually doing what they say they're doing. And going forward, we're going to increase the number of audits that we do as well.
So last question is it's my understanding based on the testimony here today that even after I'm off of Facebook, that you guys still have the ability to follow my web interactions. Is that correct?
Congressman,
I've logged out of Facebook. Do you still have the ability to follow my interactions on the web?
Congressman, you have control over what we do for ads and the information collection around that. On security, there may be specific things about how you use Facebook, even if you're not logged in, that we keep track of to make sure that people aren't abusing the systems.
Gentleman's time has expired. And just for our members who haven't had a chance to ask questions, we will pause at 1:30. Well, we will have votes at 1:40. We will continue the hearing after a brief pause, and we'll coordinate that. We'll go now to Dr. Bashan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being here. There are plenty of anecdotal examples, including from family members of mine, where people will be verbally discussing items never having actually been on the internet at the time. And then the next time they get on Facebook or other online apps, ads for things that they were verbally discussing with each other will show up. And I know you said in the Senate that Facebook doesn't specifically listen to what people are saying through their phone, whether that's a Google phone or whether it's Apple or another one. However, the other day, my mother-in-law and I were discussing her brother who had been deceased for about 10 years, and later on that evening on her Facebook site she had set to music kind of a in memoriam picture collage that came up on Facebook specifically to her brother, and that happened the other night. So if you're not listening to us on the phone, who is, and do you have specific contracts with these companies that will provide data that is being acquired verbally through our phones, or now through things like Alexa or other products?
Congressman, we're not collecting any information verbally on the microphone, and we don't have contracts with anyone else who is. The only time that we might use the microphone is when you're recording a video or doing something where you intentionally are trying to record audio, but we don't have anything that is trying to listen to what's going on in the background.
Okay, because, I mean, like I said, I mean, you've talked to people that this has happened to. My son, who lives in Chicago, him and his colleagues were talking about a certain type of suit because they're business guys, and the next day he had a bunch of ads for different suits on it when he went onto the internet. So it's pretty obvious to me that someone is listening to the audio on our phones, and that I see that as a pretty big issue. And the reason is because, and you may not be, but I see it as a pretty big issue because, for example, if you're in your doctor's office, if you're in your corporate boardroom, your office, or even personal areas of your home, that's potentially an issue. And I'm glad to hear that Facebook isn't listening, but I'm skeptical that someone isn't. And I see this as an industry-wide issue that you could potentially help address. And the final thing I'll just ask is that when you have, say, an executive session or whatever, your corporate board, and you have decisions to be made, do you allow the people in the room to have their phones on them?
Congressman, we do. I don't think we have a policy that says that your phone can't be on. And again, I'm not familiar with, Facebook doesn't do this, and I'm not familiar with other companies that do either. My understanding is that a lot of these cases that you're talking about are a coincidence, or someone might be talking about something, but then they also go to a website or interact with it on Facebook because they were talking about it, and then maybe they'll see the ad because of that, which is a much clearer statement of the intent.
Okay, because if that's the case, then, I mean, I know for convenience, companies have developed things like Alexa, and I don't want to and other companies are developing things like that. But it just seems to me that the whole point of those products is not just for your own convenience, but when you're verbally talking about things and you're not on the internet, they are able to collect information on the type of activities that you're engaging in. So I'd implore the industry to look into that and make sure that, in addition to physical exploring the internet and collecting data, that data being taken verbally not be allowed. Thank you.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Kennedy, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience and over both days of testimony. You spoke about the framing of your testimony about privacy, security, and democracy. I want to ask you about privacy and democracy, because I think obviously those are linked. You have said over the course of questioning yesterday and today that users own all of their data. So I want to make sure that we drill down on that a little bit, and I think our colleagues have tried. That includes, I believe, that the information that Facebook requires users to make public. So that would be a profile picture, gender, age range, all of which is public-facing information. That's right?
Yes.
Okay. So can advertisers then, understanding that you, Facebook, maintain the data, you're not selling that to anybody else, but advertisers clearly end up having access through that through agreements with you about how they then target ads to me, to you, to any other user. Can advertisers in any way use non-public data, so data that individuals would not think is necessarily public, so that they can target their ads?
Congressman, the way this works is, let's say you have a business that is selling skis, okay, and you have on your profile that you are interested in skiing, but let's say you haven't made that public, but you share it with your friends, or so broadly. We don't tell the advertiser that here's a list of people who like skis. They just say, okay, we're trying to sell skis. Can you reach people who like skis? And then we match that up on our side without sharing any of that information.
Understood. You don't share that, but they get access to that information so that if they know that they want to market skis to me because I like skis. On the realm of data that is accessible to them, does Facebook include deleted data?
Congressman, no.
Okay.
And I also would push back on the idea that we're giving them access to the data. we allow them to reach people who said that on Facebook, but we're not giving them access to the data.
Fair. So can advertisers either directly or indirectly get access to or use the metadata that Facebook collects in order to more specifically target ads? So that would include, I know you've talked a lot about how Facebook would use access to information for folks that, well, I might be able to opt in or out about your ability to track me to other websites. Is that used by those advertisers as well?
Congressman, I'm not sure I understand the question. Can you give me an example of what you mean?
Essentially, does the advertisers that are using your platform, do they get access to information that the user does not actually think is either one, being generated, or two, is public? Understanding that, yes, if you dive into the details of your platform, users might be able to shut that off. But I think one of the challenges with trust here is that there's an awful lot of information that's generated that people don't think that they're generating, and that advertisers are being able to target because Facebook collects it.
Yes. So, Congressman, my understanding is that the targeting options that are available for advertisers are generally things that are based on what people share. Now, once an advertiser chooses how they want to target something, Facebook also does its own work to help rank and determine which ads are going to be interesting to which people. So we may use metadata or other behaviors of what you've shown that you're interested in a newsfeed or other places in order to make our systems more relevant to you. But that's a little bit different from giving that as an option to an advertiser, if that makes sense.
Right, but then I guess the question back to, and I only got 20 seconds, I think one of the rubs that you're hearing is I don't understand how users then own that data. I think that's part of the rub. Second, you focus a lot of your testimony and the questions on the individual privacy aspects of this, but we haven't talked about the societal implication of it. And I think while I applaud some of the reforms that you're putting forward, the underlying issue here is that your platform has become a mix of, 2 seconds, news, entertainment, social media, that is up for manipulation. We've seen that with a foreign actor. If the changes to individual privacy don't seem to be sufficient to address that underlying issue.
Time has expired.
Love your comments on that at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Chair to recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Flores, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, thank you for being here today. I'm up here, top row. I'm certain that there are other things you'd rather be doing. The activities of Facebook and other technology companies should not surprise us. I mean, we've seen it before, and again, don't take this critically, but we saw a large oil company become a monopoly back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. We saw a large telecommunications company become a near monopoly in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And just as Facebook, these companies were founded by bright entrepreneurs, or their companies grew, and eventually they sometimes became detached from everyday Americans. And what happened is policymakers then had to step in and reestablish the balance between those folks and everyday Americans. You didn't intend for this to happen. It did happen, and I appreciate that you've apologized for it. And one of the things I appreciate about Facebook, it appears you're proactively trying to address the situation. Just as we addressed those monopolies in the past, we're faced with that situation today. We need to, and this goes beyond Facebook. This has to do with the edge providers. It has to do with social media organizations and also with ISPs. Back to Facebook in particular, though, we heard examples yesterday during the Senate hearing and also today during this hearing so far about ideological bias among the users of Facebook. In my Texas district, I had a retired school teacher whose conservative postings were banned or stopped. The good news is I was able to work with Facebook's personnel and get her reinstated. That said, the Facebook censors still seem to be trying to stop her postings, and anything you can do in that regard to fix that bias will go a long way. I want to move a different direction. That's to talk about the future. Congress needs to consider policy responses, as I said earlier, and I want to call this policy response Privacy 2.0 and Fairness 2.0. With respect to fairness, I think the technology companies should be ideologically agnostic regarding their users' public-facing activities. The only exception would be for potentially violent behavior. I'll ask my question is on this. Do you agree that Facebook and other technology platforms should be ideologically neutral?
Congressman, I agree that we should be a platform for all ideas and that we should focus on that.
Good. I've got limited time. With respect to privacy, I think that we need to set a baseline. When we talk about a virtual person that each technology user establishes online, their name, address, their online purchases, geolocation data, websites visited, pictures, et cetera, I think that the individual owns the virtual person that they've set up online. My second question is this. You said earlier that each user owns their virtual presence. Do you think that this concept should apply to all technology providers, including social media platforms, edge providers, and ISPs?
Congressman, yes. In general, I mean, I think that people own their information.
I'm not trying to cut you off. You can provide more information supplementally after, if you don't mind. In this regard, I believe that if Congress enacts privacy standards for technology providers, just as we have for financial institutions, healthcare, employee benefits, et cetera, the policy should state that the data of technology users should be held privately unless they specifically consent to the use of the data by others. This release should be based upon the absolute transparency as to what data will be used, how it will be processed, where it will be stored, what algorithms will be applied to it, who will have access to it, if it will be sold, and to whom it might be sold. The disclosure of this information and the associated opt-in actions should be easy to understand and easier for non-technical users to execute. The days of the long scrolling fine print disclosures with a single check mark at the bottom should end. In this regard, based on my use of Facebook, I think you've come a long way toward meeting that objective. I think we must move further. I'll have two other questions to submit later. And thank you. You can expand on your responses to my earlier questions later. Thank you.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California for 4 minutes. Mr. Cardenas.
Thank you very much. Seems like we've been here forever, don't you think? Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, for holding this important hearing. I'm of the opinion that basically we're hearing from one of the leaders, the CEO of one of the biggest corporations in the world, but yet almost entirely in an environment that is unregulated, or for basic terms, that the lanes in which you're supposed to operate in are very wide and broad, unlike other industries. Yet at the same time, I have a chart here of the growth of Facebook. Congratulations to you and your shareholders. It shows that in 2009, your net value of the company was less than, or revenue was less than $1 billion. And then you look all the way over to 2016, it was in excess of 26 billion. And then in 2017, apparently about close to 40 billion. Are those numbers relatively accurate about the growth and the phenomenon of Facebook?
Congressman, they sound relatively accurate.
Okay. Just so you know, it just brought to my attention, my staff texted me a little while ago that the CEO of Cambridge Analytica apparently stepped down sometime today. I don't know if anybody of your team there whispered that to you, but my staff just reported that. That's interesting. The fact that the CEO of Cambridge Analytica stepped down, does that in and of itself solve the issue and the controversy around what they did?
Congressman, I don't think so. There are a couple of big issues here. One is what happened specifically with Cambridge Analytica. How were they able to buy data from a developer that people chose to share it with? And how do we make sure that that can't happen again?
But some of that information did originate with Facebook, correct?
People had it on Facebook and then chose to share theirs and some of their friends' information with this developer, yes.
Mm-hmm. Something was brought to my attention most recently that apparently Facebook does in fact actually buy information to add or augment the information that you have on some of your users to build around them, their profile?
Congressman, we just recently announced that we were stopping working with data brokers as part of the ad system.
But you did do that to build your company in the past.
It's an industry standard ad practice, and recently, upon examining all of our systems, we decided that's not a thing that we want to be a part of, even if everyone else is doing it.
But you did engage in that as well, not just everybody else, but Facebook yourselves, you did engage in that?
Yes, until we announced that we're shutting it down, yes.
Okay. It's my understanding that when The Guardian decided to report on the Cambridge Analytica consumer data issue, Facebook threatened to sue them if they went forward with their story. It appears, did it happen something like that? Facebook kind of warned them like, hey, maybe you don't want to do that?
Congressman, I don't believe that, I think that there may have been a specific factual inaccuracy that we.
So in other words, you checking The Guardian and saying you're not going to want to go out with that story because it's not 100% factual.
On a specific point, yes.
Okay. Now, however, they did go through with their story, regardless of the warnings or the threats of Facebook saying that you're not going to want to do that. When they did do that, and only then did Facebook actually apologize for that incident, for that 89 million users' information, unfortunately, ending up in their hands. Isn't that the case?
Congressman, you're right that we apologized after they posted the story. They had most of the details of what was right there, and I don't think we objected to that. There
Thank
was
you.
Specific things.
Okay, but I only have a few more seconds. My main point is this. I think it's time that you, Facebook, if you want to truly be a leader in all the sense of the word and recognize that you can, in fact, do right by American users of Facebook, and when it comes to information, unfortunately, getting in the wrong hands, you can be a leader. Are you committed to actually being a leader in that sense?
Chairman, the gentleman's time.
Can you give a 2-second answer?
Sure.
Congressman, I am definitely committed to taking a broader view of our responsibility. That's what my testimony is about, making sure that we don't just give people tools, but make sure that they're used for good.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And with that, we will recess for about 5 minutes, 10 minutes. We'll recess for 10 minutes and then resume the hearing.
Actually, you know what? Oh, hey, good idea.
Life hack.
You did. They're mixing up shots. You just went outside the drag. I don't know. It sounds like they're going to stay hot with us the whole time. There's like 6 on the bottom. Lower guys.
like gymnastics. Yeah. Look. Yes. Hi. Very good. Yeah, good. I just have a few minutes to chat. They're about to come back. Actually, they're coming back into session right now. I'll back after this Okay. All right. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
And we will go next to the gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Brooks, for 4 minutes to resume questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being here today. It's so critically important that we hear from you and your company, because we do believe that it's critically important for you to be a leader in these solutions. One thing that's been talked about just very little, but I think is very important, and I want to make sure there's appropriate attention on how the platform of Facebook, but even other platforms, and you've mentioned it a little bit, how you help us in this country keep our country safe from terrorists. And so that I've talked with lots of people who actually continue to remain very concerned about recruitment of their younger family members, and now we're seeing around the globe an enhanced recruitment of women as well to join terrorist organizations. And so I'm very, very concerned. I'm a former U.S. attorney, and so when 9/11 happened, you didn't exist. Facebook didn't exist. But since the evolution after 9/11, we know that Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, ISIS has used social media like we could not even imagine. So could you please talk about, and then you talked about the fact that if there is content objectionable or is a danger, that people report it to you. But what if they don't? What if everybody assumes that someone is reporting something to you? So I need you to help assure us, as well as the American people, what is Facebook's role, leadership role, in helping us fight terrorism and help us stop the recruitment, because it is still a grave danger around the world.
Congresswoman, thanks for the question. Terrorist content and propaganda has no place in our network, and we've developed a number of tools that have now made it so that 99% of the ISIS and Al-Qaeda content that we take down is identified by these systems and taken down before anyone in our system even flags it for us. So that's an example of removing harmful content that we're proud of, and that I think is a model for other types of harmful content as well.
Can I ask, though, and I appreciate, and I've heard you say 99%, and yet I didn't go out and, look for this, but yet, as recently as March 29th, ISIS content was discovered on Facebook, which included an execution video. March 29th. On April 9th, there were 5 pages located on April 9th of Hezbollah content, and so forth. And so, what is the mechanism that you're using? Is it artificial intelligence? Is it the 20,000 people? What are you using to, because it's not, I appreciate that no system is perfect, but yet this is just within a week.
Congressman, it's a good question, and it's a combination of technology and people. We have a counterterrorism team at Facebook.
How large is it?
200 people are just focused on counterterrorism, and there are other content reviewers who are reviewing content that gets flagged to them as well. So those are folks who are working specifically on that. I think we have capacity in 30 languages that we're working on. And in addition to that, we have a number of AI tools that we're developing, like the ones that I'd mentioned, that can proactively go flag the content.
And so you might have those people looking for the content. How are they helping block the recruiting?
Yes,
which is still your platform, as well as Twitter, and then WhatsApp is how they then begin to communicate, which I understand you own. Is that correct?
Yes.
So how are we stopping the recruiting and the communications?
So we identify what might be the patterns of communication or messaging that they might put out, and then design systems that can proactively identify that and flag those for our teams. That way we can go and take those down.
Thank you. My time is up. I thank you, and please continue to work with us and all the governments who are trying to fight terrorism around the world.
Thank you. We will. And Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, before we go to the next question, there was something that I wanted to correct in my testimony from earlier. When I went back and talked to my team afterwards, I'd said that if this was in response to a question about whether weblogs that we had about a person would be in Download Your Information, I had said that they were. And I clarified with my team that, in fact, the weblogs are not in Download Your Information. We only store them temporarily, and we convert the weblogs into a set of ad interests that you might be interested in those ads, and we put that in the Download Your Information instead, and you have complete control over that. So I just wanted to clarify that one for the record.
Thank you. We'll go now to a gentleman from California, Mr. Ruiz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for appearing before the committee today. The fact is, Mr. Zuckerberg, Facebook failed its customers. You've said as much yourself. You've apologized, and we appreciate that. We as Congress have a responsibility to figure out what went wrong here and what could be done differently to better protect consumers' private digital data in the future. So my first question for you, Mr. Zuckerberg, is why did Facebook not notify the FTC in 2015 when you first discovered this had happened? And was it the legal opinion of your company that you were under no obligation to notify the FTC, even with the 2011 consent order in place?
Congressman, in retrospect, it was a mistake, and we should have, and I wish we had notified and told people about it then.
Did you think that
the reason why we didn't?
The rules were kind of lax, that you were sort of debating whether you needed to or something?
Yes, Congressman, I don't believe that we necessarily had a legal obligation to do so. I just think that it was probably, I think that it was the right thing to have done. The reason why we didn't do it at the time.
Well, you answered my question. Would you agree that for Facebook to continue to be successful, it needs to continue to have the trust of its users?
Absolutely.
Great. So does this not perhaps strike you as a weakness with the current system, that you were not required to notify the FTC of a potential violation of your own consent decree with them, and that you did not have clear guidelines for what you as a company needed to do in this situation to maintain the public's trust and act in their best interest?
Congressman, regardless of what the laws or regulations are that are in place, we take a broader view of our responsibilities around privacy, and I think that we should have notified people because it would have been the right thing to do.
I'm just trying to think of
committed-
the other CEO who might not have such a broad view and might interpret the different legal requirements maybe differently. So that's why I'm asking these questions. I'm also taking a broad view as a congressman here to try to fix this problem. So from what we've learned over the past 2 days of hearings, it just doesn't seem like the FTC has the necessary tools to do what needs to be done to protect consumer data and consumer privacy. And we can't exclusively rely on companies to self-regulate in the best interest of consumers. So, Mr. Zuckerberg, would it be helpful if there was an entity clearly tasked with overseeing how consumer data is being collected, shared, and used, and which could offer guidelines, at least guidelines for companies like yours to ensure your business practices are not in violation of the law, something like a digital consumer protection agency?
Congressman, I think it's an idea that deserves a lot of consideration. I'm not the type of person who thinks that there should be no regulation, especially because the internet is getting to be so important in people's lives around the world. But I think the details on this really matter. And whether it's an agency or a law that is passed, or the FTC has certain abilities, I think that is all something that we should.
Well, one of the things that we're realizing is that there's a lot of holes in the system. That we don't have the toolbox. You don't have the toolbox to monitor 9 million apps and tens of thousands of data collectors, and there's no specific mechanism for you to collaborate with those that can help you prevent these things from happening. And so I think that perhaps if we started having these discussions about what would have been helpful for you to build your toolbox and for us to build our toolbox so that we can prevent things like Cambridge Analytica, things like identity thefts, things like what we're seeing, what we've heard about today. So, I just want to thank you for your thoughts and testimony. So it's clear to me that this is the beginning of many conversations on the topic, and I look forward to working with you and the committee to better protect consumer privacy.
Congressman, we look forward to following up too.
Thank you.
Now go to gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Mullen, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, sir, thank you for being here. I appreciate you using the term Congressman and Congresswoman. My name is Mark Wayne Mullen, and feel free to use that name. Sir, I just want to tell you, first of all, I want to commend you on your ability to not just invent something, but to see it through its growth. We see a lot of inventors have the ability to do that, but to manage it and to see it through its tremendous growth period takes a lot of talent. And you can show, or by your showing here today, you handle yourself well, so thank you on that. And you also do that by hiring the right people, so I commend you on doing that also. You hire people, obviously, based on their ability to get the job done. Real quick, couple questions I have, and I'll give you time to answer it. Isn't it the consumer's responsibility to some degree to control the content to which they release?
Congressman, I believe that people should have the ability to choose to share their data how they want, and they need to understand how that's working, but I agree with what you're saying, that people want to have the ability to move their data to another app, and we want to give them the tools to do that.
Right. And does the device settings, does it really help you protect what information is released? For instance, there's been a lot of talk about them searching for something maybe on Google, and then the advertisement pops up on Facebook. Isn't there a setting on most devices to where you can close out the browser without Facebook interacting with that?
Yes, Congressman. On most devices, the way the operating system is architected would prevent something that you do in another app like Google from being visible to the Facebook app.
See, I come from the background of believing that everything I do, I assume, is open for anybody to take when I'm on the internet. I understand that it is privacy concerns, but you're still releasing it to something farther than a pen and pad. So once I'm on the web or I'm on an app, then that information is subject to going really any place. All I can do is protect it the best I can by my settings. And so what I'm trying to get to is, as an individual, as a user of Facebook, how can someone control keeping the content within the realm that they want to keep it without it being collected? You say that, you know, you don't sell it. However, you do sell advertisement. As a business owner, I have a demographic that I go after, and I search advertisers that market to that demographic. So you collect information for that purpose, right?
Congressman, yes, we collect information to make sure that the ad experience on Facebook can be relevant and valuable to the small businesses and others who want to reach people. Value-based,
but if I'm a customer or a user of Facebook and I don't want that information to be shared, how do I keep that from happening? Is there settings within the app that I need to go to block all that?
Congressman, yes, there is. There is a setting, so if you don't want any data to be collected around advertising, you can turn that off, and then we won't do it. In general, we offer a lot of settings over every type of information that you might want to share on Facebook, and every way that you might interact with the system, from here's the content that you put on your page, to here is who can see your interests, to here's how you might show up in search results if people look for you, to here's how you might be able to sign into developer apps and log in with Facebook and advertising. And we try to make the controls as easy to understand as possible. You know, it's a broad service. People use it for a lot of things, so there are a number of controls, but we try to make it as easy as possible and to put those controls in front of people so that they can configure the experience in the way that they want.
Would that have kept apps from seeking our information?
Yeah.
If that setting
Gentleman's time.
Right. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Recognize now the gentleman from California for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being with us today. And I know it's been a long day. I think we could all agree that technology has outpaced the law with respect to the protection of private information. I wonder if you think it would be reasonable for Congress to define the legal duty of privacy that's owed by private companies to their customers with respect to their personal information.
Congressman, I think that makes sense to discuss. And I agree with the broader point that I think you're making, which is that the internet and technology overall is just becoming a much more important part of all of our lives. The companies in the technology industry are growing.
Right, that's what I mean by it's outpaced. And I wonder, I also want to take you at your word. I believe you're sincere that you personally place a high value on consumer privacy, and that personal commitment is significant at Facebook today coming from you, given your position. But I also observe, and you'd agree, that the performance on privacy has been inconsistent. I wonder, myself, whether that's because it's not a bottom line issue. It appears that the shareholders are interested in maximizing profits. Privacy certainly doesn't drive profits, I don't think, but also may interfere with profits if you have to sacrifice your ad revenues because of privacy concerns. Would it not be appropriate for us, once we define this duty, to assess financial penalties in a way that would sufficiently send a signal to the shareholders and to your employees, who you must be frustrated with too, that the privacy you're so concerned about is a bottom line issue at Facebook?
Congressman, it's certainly something that we can consider, although one thing that I would push back on is I think it is often characterized as maybe these mistakes happen because there's some conflict between what people want and business interests. I actually don't think that's the case. I think a lot of these hard decisions come down to different interests between different people. So, for example, on the one hand, people want the ability to sign into apps and bring some of their information and bring some of their friends' information in order to have a social experience. And on the other hand, everyone wants their information locked down and completely private. And the question is not a business question as much as which of those equities do you weigh more?
I think part of it is that, but part of it is also what happened with Cambridge Analytica. Some of this data got away from us. And I'd suggest to you that if there were financial consequences to that made a difference to the business, not people dropping their Facebook accounts, they would get more attention. And it's not so much a business model choice. I congratulate you on your business model. But it's that these issues aren't getting the bottom line attention that I think would have made them a priority with respect to Facebook. Let me just follow up in my final time on an exchange you had with Senator Graham yesterday about regulation. And I think Senator said, do you as a company welcome regulation? You said if it's the right regulation, then yes. question, do you think that the Europeans have it right? And you said, I think they get some things right. I wanted you to elaborate on what the Europeans got right and what do you think they got wrong?
Congressman, well, there are a lot of things that the Europeans do, and I think that GDPR in general is going to be a very positive step for the internet, and it codifies a lot of the things in there are things that we've done for a long time. Some of them are things that I think would be good steps for us to take. So, for example, the controls that this requires are generally privacy controls that we've offered around the world for years. Putting the tools in front of people repeatedly, not just having them in settings, but putting them in front of people and getting and making sure that people understand what the controls are and that they get affirmative consent, I think is a good thing to do that we've done periodically in the past. But I think it makes sense to do more. Right. And I think that's something that GDPR will require us to do and will be positive.
Anything you think they got wrong?
I need to think about that more.
Well, I appreciate it if you could respond in writing. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We'll go now to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Hudson, for 4 minutes.
Right here. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being here. This is a long day. You were here voluntarily, and we sure appreciate you being here. I can say from my own experience, I've hosted 2 events with Facebook in my district in North Carolina, working with small business and finding ways they can increase their customer base on Facebook, and it's been very beneficial to us, so I thank you for that. I did want to pivot slightly and frame the discussion in another light for my question. One of the greatest honors I have is I represent the men and women at Fort Bragg, the epicenter of the universe, home of the Airborne Special Operations. You visited last year.
I did.
Very well received. So you understand that due to the sensitive nature of some of the operations these soldiers conduct, that many are discouraged or even prohibited from having a social media presence. However, there are others who still have profiles. There are some who may have deleted their profiles upon entering military service. Many have family members who have Facebook profiles. And as we've learned, each one of these users' information may have been shared without their consent. There's no way that Facebook can guarantee the safety of this information on another company's server if they sell this information. If private information could be gathered by apps without explicit consent of the user, they're almost asking to be hacked. Are you aware of the national security concerns that would come from allowing those who seek to harm our nation access to information such as the geographical location of members of our armed services? Is this something that you're looking at?
Congressman, I'm not specifically aware of that threat, but in general, there are a number of national security and election integrity type issues that we focus on, and we try to take a very broad view of that. And the more input that we can get from the intelligence community as well, encouraging us to look into specific things, the more effectively we could do that work.
Great. Well, I'd love to follow up with you on that. It's been said many times here that you refer to Facebook as a platform of all ideas, or platform for all ideas. I know you've heard from many yesterday and today about concerns regarding Facebook's censorship of content, particularly content that may promote Christian beliefs or conservative political beliefs. I have to bring up Diamond and Silk again because they're actually from my district, but I think you've addressed these concerns, but I think it's also become very apparent, and I hope it's become very apparent to you, that this is a very serious concern. I actually asked on my Facebook page for my constituents to give me ideas of things they'd like me to ask you today, and the most common question was about personal privacy. So this is something that I think there is an issue. There's an issue that your company, in terms of trust with consumers, I think you need to deal with. I think you recognize that based on your testimony today. But my question to you is, what is the standard that Facebook uses to determine what is offensive or controversial, and how's that standard been applied across Facebook's platform?
Congressman, this is an important question. So there are a couple of standards. The strongest one is things that will cause physical harm or threats of physical harm. But then there's a broader standard of hate speech and speech that might make people feel just broadly uncomfortable or unsafe in the community.
And that's probably the most difficult to define. So I guess my question is, how do you apply, what standards do you apply to try to determine what's hate speech versus what's just speech you may disagree with?
Congressman, that's a very important question, and I think is one that we struggle with continuously. And the question of what is hate speech versus what is legitimate political speech is, I think, something that we get criticized both from the left and the right on what the definitions are that we have. It is it's nuanced, and what we try to lay this out in our community standards, which are public documents that we can make sure that you and your office get to look through the definitions on this. But this is an area where I think society's sensibilities are also shifting quickly, and it's also very different in different
Just
countries.
run out of time here. I hate to cut you off, but let me just say that based on the statistics Mr. Scalise shared and the anecdotes we can provide you, it seems like there's still a challenge when it comes to conservative, and I hope you'll address that.
I agree.
So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will stop talking.
Gentleman's time's expired. We now go to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Collins, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I wasn't sure where I would be going with this, but when you're number 48 out of 54 members, you can do a lot of listening, and I've tried to do that today. And to frame where I am now, I think, first of all, thank you for coming. And there's a saying, you don't know what you know till you know it. And I really think you've done a great benefit to Facebook and yourself in particular, as we now have heard without a doubt, Facebook doesn't sell data. I think the narrative would be, of course you sell data. And now we all know across America, you don't sell data. I think that's very good for you, a very good clarification. The other one is that the whole situation we're here is because a third-party app developer, Alexander Kogan, didn't follow through on the rules. He was told he can't sell the data. He gathered the data, and then he did what he's not supposed to, and he sold that data. And it's very hard to anticipate a bad actor doing what they're doing until after they've done it. And clearly you took actions after 2014. So one real quick question is, what did change in 10 or 20 or 30 seconds? What data was being collected before you locked down the platform, and how did that change to today?
Congressman, thank you. So before 2014, when we announced the change, someone could sign into an app and share some of their data, but also could share some basic information about their friends. And in 2014, the major change was we said, now you're not going to be able to share any information about your friends. So if you and your friend both happen to be playing a game together or on an app that listening to music together, then that app could have some information from both of you because you each had signed in and authorized that app. But other than that, people wouldn't be able to share information from their friends. So the basic issue here were 300,000 people used this poll and the app and then ultimately sold it to Cambridge Analytica, and Cambridge Analytica had access to as many as 87 million people's information. Wouldn't be possible today. Today, if 300,000 people used an app, the app might have information about 300,000 people.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good clarification as well, because people were wondering, how does 300,000 become 87 million? So that's also something that's good to know. And I guess my last minute is I've heard the tone here. I've got to give you all the credit in the world. I could tell from the tone, we would say the other side sometimes when we point to our left. But when the representative from Illinois, to quote her, said, "Who is going to protect us from Facebook?" I mean, that threw me back in my chair. I mean, that was certainly an aggressive, we'll use the polite word aggressive, but I think out of bounds kind of comment, just my opinion. And I've said, I was interviewed by a couple of folks in the break, and I said, as I'm listening to you today, I'm quite confident that you truly are doing good. You believe in what you're doing. 2.2 billion people are using your platform. And I sincerely know in my heart that you do believe in keeping all ideas equal. And you may vote a certain way or not, but that doesn't matter. You've got 27,000 employees, and I think the fact is that you're operating under a Federal Trade Commission consent decree from 2011. That's a real thing, and it goes for 20 years. So when someone said, do we need more regulations, or do we need more legislation, I said no. Right now, what we have is Facebook with a CEO that's mind is in the right place, doing the best you can with 27,000 people, but the consent decree does what it does. I mean, there'd be significant financial penalties were Facebook to ignore that consent decree. So I think as I'm hearing this meeting going back and forth, I, for one, think it was beneficial. It's good. I don't think we need more regulations and legislation now. And I want to congratulate you, I think, on doing a good job here today and presenting your case, and we now know things we didn't know beforehand. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay. Now I think we go next in order to Mr. Wahlberg, actually, who was here when the gavel dropped. So We will go to Mr. Wahlberg for 4 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. And Mr. Zuckerberg, I appreciate you being here as well. It has been interesting to listen to all of the comments from both sides of the aisle, to get an idea of the breadth, length, depth, the vastness of our World Wide Web, social media, and more specifically, Facebook. I want to ask 3 starter questions. Don't think they'll take a long answer, but I'll let you answer it. Earlier you indicated that there were bad actors that triggered your platform policy changes in 2014, but you didn't identify who those bad actors were. Who were they?
Congressman, I don't, sitting here today, remember a lot of the specifics of early on, but we saw generally a bunch of app developers who were asking for permissions to access people's data in ways that weren't connected to the functioning of an app. So they'd just say, okay, if you want to log into my app, you would have to share all this content, even though the app doesn't actually use that in any reasonable way. So we looked at that and said, hey, this isn't right. Or we should review these apps and make sure that if an app developer is going to ask someone to access certain data, that they actually have a reason why they want to get access to it. And over time, that we made a series of changes that culminated in the major change in 2014 that I referenced before, where ultimately we made it so now a person could sign in but not bring their friends' information with them anymore.
Okay. Secondly, is there any way that Facebook can, with any level of certainty, ensure Facebook users that every single app on its platform is not misusing their data?
Congressman, it would be difficult to ever guarantee that any single, that there were no bad actors. Okay. Every problem around security is sort of an arms race, right? You have people who are trying to abuse systems, and our responsibility is to make that as hard as possible and to take the necessary precautions for a company of our scale. And I think that the responsibility that we have is growing with our scale, and we need to make sure that we live up to that.
I think that's an adequate answer. It's a truthful answer. Can you assure me that ads and content are not being denied based on particular views?
Congressman, yes, politically, although I think what you, when I hear that, what I hear is kind of normal political speech. We certainly are not going to allow ads for terrorist content, for example, so we would be banning those views, and I think that that's
Let me push it a little bit here, and I wanted to bring up a screen grab that we had. Again, going back to Representative Upton earlier on, was his constituent, but was my legislative director for a time. It was his campaign ad that he was going to boost his post, and he was rejected. I was rejected as being said here, your ad wasn't approved because it doesn't follow advertising policies. We don't allow ads that contain shocking, disrespectful, or sensational content, including ads that depict violence or threats of violence. Now, as I read that, now I also know that you have since, or Facebook has since declared, no, that was a mistake, an algorithm problem that went on there. But that's our concern that we have, that it wouldn't be because he had his picture with a veteran, it wouldn't be because he wanted to reduce spending, but pro-life, Second Amendment, those things, and conservative, that causes us some concerns. So I guess what I'm saying here, I believe that we ought to have a light touch in regulation. And when I hear some of my friends on the other side of the aisle decry the fact of what's going on now, and they were high-fiving what took place in 2012 with President Obama and what he was capable of doing in bringing in and grabbing for use in a political way, I would say the best thing we can do is have these light-of-day hearings, let you self-regulate as much as possible with a light touch coming from us, but recognizing that in the end, your Facebook subscribers are going to tell you what you need to do.
Gentleman's time.
So thank you for your time, and thank you for the time you've given me.
Yep. Now recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Walters, for 4 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being here. One of my biggest concerns is the misuse of consumer data and what controls users have over their information. You have indicated that Facebook users have granular control over their own content content and who can see it. As you can see on the screen, on the left is a screenshot of the on-off choice for apps, which must be on for users to use apps that require a Facebook login and which allows apps to collect your information. On the right is a screenshot of what a user sees when they want to change the privacy settings on a post, photo, or other content. Same account, same user. But which control governs? The app platform access or the user's decision as to who they want to see a particular post?
Sorry, could you repeat the?
So which app governs, okay, or which control governs? The app platform access or the user's decision as to who they want to see a particular post? So if you look up there on the screen.
Yeah, Congresswoman, so when you're using the service, if you share a photo, for example, and you say, I only want my friends to see it, then in Newsfeed and Facebook, only your friends are going to see it. If you then go to a website, and then you want to sign into that website can ask you and say, hey, here are the things that I want to get access to in order for you to use the website. If you sign in after seeing that screen where the website is asking for certain information, then you are also authorizing that website to have access to that information. If you've turned off the platform completely, which is what the control is that you have on the left, then you wouldn't be able to sign into another website. You'd have to go reactivate this before that would even work.
Okay, do you think that the average Facebook user understands that is how it works, and how would they find this out?
Congresswoman, I think that the settings when you're signing into an app are quite clear. In terms of every time you go to sign into an app, you have to go through a whole screen that says, here's the app, here's your friends who use it, here are the pieces of information that it would like to have access to. You make a decision whether you sign in, yes or no, and until you say, I want to sign in, nothing gets shared. Similarly, in terms of sharing content, every single time that you go to upload a photo, you have to make a decision. It's right there at the top. It says, are you sharing this with your friends or publicly or with some group? And every single time that's quite clear. So in those cases, yes, I think that this is quite clear.
Okay, so these user control options are in different locations. And it seems to me that putting all privacy control options in a single location would be more user-friendly. Why aren't they in the same location?
Well, Congresswoman, we typically do two things. We have a settings page that has all of your settings in one place in case you want to go and play around or configure your settings. But the more important thing is putting the settings in line when you're trying to make a decision. So if you're going to share a photo now, we think that your setting about who you want to share that photo with should be in line right there. If you're going to sign into an app, we think that it should be very clear right in line when you're signing into the app what permissions that app is asking for. So we do both. It's both in one place in settings if you want to go to it, and it's in line in the relevant place.
Okay, California has been heralded by many on this committee for its privacy initiatives. Given that you and other major tech companies are in California and we are still experiencing privacy issues, how do you square the two?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So given that you and other major tech companies are in California and we are still experiencing privacy issues, how do you square the two?
What was the other piece?
California has been heralded by many in this committee for its privacy initiatives.
Well, Congresswoman, I think that privacy is not something that you can ever, it's our understanding of the issues between people and how they interact online only grows over time. So I think we'll figure out what the social norms are and the rules that we want to put in place. And then 5 years from now, we'll come back and we'll have learned more things. And either that'll just be that social norms have evolved and the company's practices have evolved, or we'll put rules in place. But I think that our understanding of this is going to evolve over quite a long time. So I would expect that even if a state like California is forward-leaning, that's not necessarily going to mean that we fully understand everything or have solved all the issues.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Recognize the gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Dingle, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, thank you for your patience. I am a daily Facebook user, much to my staff's distress. I do it myself. And because we need a little humor, I'm even married to a 91-year-old man that's the king of Twitter. But I know Facebook's value. I've used it for a long time. But with that value also comes obligation. We've all been sitting here for more than 4 hours. But some things are striking during this conversation. As CEO, you didn't know some key facts. You didn't know about major court cases regarding your privacy policies against your company. You didn't know that the FTC doesn't have fining authority and that Facebook could not have received fines for the 2011 consent order. You didn't know what a shadow profile was. You didn't know how many apps you need to audit. You did not know how many other firms have been sold data by Dr. Kogan other than Cambridge Analytica and Innoia Technologies, even though you were asked that question yesterday. And yes, we were all paying attention yesterday. You don't even know all the kinds of information Facebook is collecting from its own users. Here's what I do know. You have trackers all over the web. On practically every website you go to, we all see the Facebook like or Facebook share buttons. And with the Facebook pixel, people browsing the internet may not even see that Facebook logo. It doesn't matter whether you have a Facebook account. Through those tools, Facebook is able to collect information from all of us. So I want to ask you, how many Facebook like buttons are there on non-Facebook web pages?
Congresswoman, I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, but we'll get back to you.
Is the number over 100 million?
I believe we've served the like button on pages more than that, but I don't know the number of pages that have the like button on actively.
How many Facebook share buttons are there on non-Facebook web pages?
I don't know the answer to that exactly off the top of my head either, but that's something that we can follow up with you on.
And we think that's over 100 million, likely. How many chunks of Facebook pixel code are there on non-Facebook web pages?
Congresswoman, you're asking some specific stats that I don't know off the top of my head, but we can follow up with you and get back to you on all of these.
Can you commit to get back to the committee? The European Union is asking for 72 hours on transparency. Do you think we could get that back in committee in 72 hours?
Congresswoman, I will talk to my team and we will follow up.
I know you're still reviewing, but do you know now whether there are other fourth parties that had access to the data from someone other than Dr. Kogan? Or is this something we're going to find out in a press release down the road? I think what worries all of us, and you've heard it today, is it has taken almost 3 years to hear about that. And I am convinced that there are other people out there.
Congresswoman, as I've said a number of times, we're now going to investigate every single app that had access to a large amount of people's information in the past before we lock down the platform. I do imagine that we will find some apps that, that were either doing something suspicious or misused people's data. If we find them, then we will ban them from the platform, take action to make sure that they delete the data, and make sure that everyone involved is informed.
And you make it public quickly, not 3 years. Thanks.
As soon as we find them.
So I'm going to conclude because my time's almost up, that I worry that when I hear companies value our privacy, that's meant in monetary terms, not in the moral obligation to protect it. Data protection and privacy are like clean air and clean water. There need to be clear rules of the road.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Costello, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would echo Congressman Collins' comments as well. Mr. Zuckerberg, I think that we as Americans have a concept of digital privacy rights and privacy that aren't necessarily codified, and we're trying to sift through how do we actually make privacy rights in a way that are intelligible for tech and understandable to the community at large. And so my questions are oriented in that fashion. First, if you look at GDPR, the EU privacy the law that's about to take effect, what pieces of that do you feel would be properly placed in American jurisprudence? In other words, right to erasure, right to get our data back, right to rectify. Could you share with us how you see that playing out, not just for you, but for the smaller companies? Because I do believe you have a sincere interest in seeing small tech companies prosper.
Yes, Congressman. So there are a few parts of GDPR that I think are important and good. One is making sure that people have control over how each piece of information that they share is used. So people should have the ability to know what a company knows about them, to control and have a setting about who can see it, and to be able to delete it whenever they want. The second set of things is making sure that people actually understand what the tools are that are available. So not just having it in some settings page somewhere, but put the tools in front of people so that they can make a decision. And that both builds trust and makes it so that people's experiences are configured in the way that they want. That's something that we've done a number of times over the years at Facebook, but with GDPR, we will now be doing more and around the whole world. The third piece is there are some very sensitive technologies that I think are important to enable innovation around, like face recognition, but that you want to make sure that you get special consent for, right? It's if we make it too hard for American companies to innovate in areas like facial recognition, then we will lose to Chinese companies and other companies around the world that are able to innovate in that.
Do you feel you should be able to deploy AI for facial recognition for a non-FB user?
Congressman, I think that's a good question, and I think that this is something that probably that people should have control over how it is used, and that we're going to be rolling out and asking people whether they want us to use it for them around the world as part of this this push that's upcoming. But I think in general, for sensitive technologies like that, I do think you want a special consent.
Right.
And I think that would be a valuable thing to consider.
Two quick ones. Is Facebook, in utilizing that platform, ever a publisher in your mind?
Congressman,
you had said you're responsible for content, right? You said that yesterday. Are you ever a publisher, as the term is legally used?
Congressman, I'm not familiar with how the term is legally used.
Would you ever be legally responsible for the content that is put onto your platform?
Well, Congressman, let me put it this way. There is content that we fund, specifically in video today.
Right.
And when we're commissioning a video to be created, then I certainly think we have full responsibility of owning that content.
Which is what I think Chairman Walden's question was up front, right?
But the vast majority of the content on Facebook is not something that we commissioned. For that, I think our responsibility is to make sure that the content on Facebook is not harmful, that people are seeing things that are relevant to them and that encourage interaction and building relationships with the people around them. And that, I think, is the primary responsibility that we have.
My big concern, I'm not running out of time, is that someone limits their data to not being used for something that it might potentially be used for that they have no idea how it might actually socially benefit. And I'm out of time, but I would like for you to share at a later point in time how the data that you get might be limited by a user, and your inability to use that data may actually prevent the kind of innovation that would bring about positive social change in this country. Because I do believe that was the intention and objective of your company, and I do believe you perform it very, very, very well in a lot of ways. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Go now to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being here. You're almost done. When you get to me, that means you're getting close to the end, so congratulations. Thank you for being here. We do appreciate it. You know, you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the privacy, people's information and the privacy and the fact that you had this lapse. You know all about fake news. You know all about foreign intervention. I know you're concerned about that. I want to talk about just a few different subjects, if you will. And I'd like to ask you just some yes or no questions. Please excuse my redundancy. I know that some members have already asked you about some of these subjects, but I would like to ask you, Mr. Zuckerberg, did you know that 91 people die every day because of opioid addiction? Yes or no? Did you know that? 91 people every day.
I did not know that specifically.
Did you know that it's estimated to be between 2.5 to 11.5 million people in this country right now who are addicted to opioids?
Yes.
Okay, did you know that the average age of Americans has decreased for the first time in decades as a result of what people are saying as a result of the opioid epidemic?
Yes, especially among certain demographics.
Absolutely. I ask you this because some of the other members have mentioned that about the ads for fentanyl and other illicit drugs that are on the internet and where you can buy them, and about your responsibility to to monitor that and make sure that's not happening. I had the opportunity this past week to speak at the Prescription Drug Abuse and Heroin Summit in Atlanta that Representative Hal Rogers started some years ago. Also, we had the FDA commissioner there, and he mentioned the fact that he's going to be meeting with CEOs of internet companies to discuss this problem. I hope that you will be willing to at least have someone there to meet with him so that we can get your help in this. This is extremely important.
Congressman, I will make sure that someone is there.
Okay, let me ask you another question, Mr. Zuckerberg. Did you know that there are groups of there are conservation groups that have provided evidence to the Security and Exchange Commission that endangered wildlife goods, in particular ivory, is extensively traded on closed groups on Facebook?
Congressman, I was not specifically aware of that, but
okay.
I think we know that there are issues with content like this that we need to do more proactive monitoring for.
All right, well, let me ask you, did you know that there are some conservation groups that assert that there's so much ivory being sold on Facebook that it's literally contributing to the extinction of the elephant species?
Congressman, I had not heard that.
Okay. And did you know that the the Motion Picture Association of America is having problems with piracy of movies and of their products, and that not only is this challenging their profits, but their very existence? Did you know that that was a problem?
Congressman, I believe that has been an issue for a long time.
It has been. It has been. So you did know that. Well, the reason I ask you this is that I just want to make sure that I understand you have an understanding of a commitment. Look, you said earlier, it may have been yesterday, that hate speech is difficult to discern, and I get that. I understand that, and you're absolutely right. But these things are not. And we need your help with this. Now, I will tell you, there are members of this body who would like to see the internet monitored as a utility. I am not one of those. I believe that would be the worst thing we could do. I believe it would stifle innovation. I don't think you can legislate morality, and I don't want to try to do that. But we need a commitment from you that these things that can be controlled like this, that you will help us and that you'll work with law enforcement to help us with this. Look, you love America. I know that. We all know that. We need your help here. I don't want Congress to have to act. You want to see a mess, you let the federal government get into this. You'll see a mess, I assure you.
Gentlemen.
Please, we need your help with this, and I just need that commitment. Can I get that commitment?
Congressman, yes, we take this very seriously. That's a big part of the reason over all these content issues, why by the end of this year we're going to have more than 20,000 people working on security and content review. And we need to build more tools, too.
Thank you very much.
Time's expired. Chair recognizes Mr. Duncan for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Usually I'm last, but today I think we have one behind me that came in late. Mr. Zuckerberg, I want to...
Only by 2 minutes did he come in late.
I want to thank you for all the work you've done, and I want to let you know that I've been on Facebook since 2007 and started as a state legislator, used Facebook to communicate with my constituents, and it has been an invaluable tool for me in communicating. We can actually do in real time multiple issues as we deal with them here in Congress, answer questions. It's almost like a town hall in real time. I also want to tell you that your staff here of the Governmental Affairs Office, Chris Herndon and others, do a fabulous job in keeping us informed, so I want to thank you for that. Before this hearing, when we heard about it, we asked our constituents and our friends on Facebook, what would they want me to ask you? And the main response was addressing the perceived and in many instances confirmed bias and viewpoint discrimination against Christians and conservatives on your platform. Today, listening to this, I think the two main issues are user privacy and censorship. The Constitution of the United States and the First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof, nor will it abridge the freedom of speech, of the press, the right of people to assemble or address the Congress for redress of grievances. So petition the Congress for redress of grievances. I've got a copy of the Constitution I want to give you at the end of this hearing. The reason I say all that, this is maybe a rhetorical question, but why not have a community standard for free speech and free exercise of religion that is simply a mirror of the First Amendment with algorithms that are viewed, have a viewpoint that is neutral? Why not do that?
Well, Congressman, I think that we can all agree that certain content like terrorist propaganda should have no place on our network. And the First Amendment, my understanding of it, is that that kind of speech is allowed in the world. I just don't think that it is the kind of thing that we want to allow to spread on the internet. So once you get into that, you're deciding that you take this value of that you care about safety and that we don't want people to be able to spread information that could cause harm. And I think that our general responsibility is to allow the broadest spectrum of free expression as we can.
And I appreciate that answer. You're right about propaganda and other issues there. And I believe the Constitution generally applies to government and says that Congress shall make no law respecting, talks about religion, and then we won't abridge the freedom of speech or the press. But the standard has been applied to private businesses, whether those are newspapers or other media platform. And I would argue that social media has now become a media platform to be considered in a lot of ways the same as other press media. So I think the First Amendment probably does apply and will apply. What will you do? Let me ask you this. What will you do to restore the First Amendment rights of Facebook users and ensure that all users are treated equally, regardless of whether they are conservative, moderate, liberal, or whatnot?
Well, Congressman, I think that we make a number of mistakes in content review today that I don't think only focus on one political persuasion. And I think it's unfortunate that when those happen, people think that we're focused on them. And it happens in different political groups. I mean, we have.
But in the essence of time, conservatives are the ones that raise the awareness that their content has been pulled. I don't see the same awareness being raised by liberal organizations, liberal candidates, or liberal policy statements. So I think you've been made aware of this over the last 2 days. Probably need to go back and make sure that those things are treated equal, and I would appreciate you do that. Again, I appreciate the platform, I appreciate the work you do, and we stand willing and able to help you here in Congress because Facebook is an invaluable part of what we do and how we communicate. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.
I yield back.
And for our final 4 minutes of questioning comes from Mr. Kramer, North Dakota, former head of the Public Utility Commission there. We welcome your comments. Go ahead.
Thank you, and thanks for being here, Mr. Zuckerberg. And, you know, don't eat the fruit of this tree is the only regulation that was ever initiated before people started abusing freedom. Since then, millions of regulations, laws, and rules have been created in response to an abuse of freedom. Oftentimes, that response is more extreme than the abuse, and that's what I fear could happen based on some of the things I've heard today in response to this. So this national discussion is very important. First of all, it's not only for these last 2 days, but that it continues, lest we over-respond, okay? Now, that said, I think that the consumer and industry, and whatever industry it is, your company or others like yours, share that responsibility. So I appreciate you, both your patience and your preparation coming in today. But in response to the questions from a few of my colleagues related to the illegal drug ads, I have to admit that there were times when I was thinking, his answers aren't very reassuring to me. And I'm wondering what your answer would be as to how quickly you could take down an illegal drug site if there was $1 million per post per day regulation fine tied to it. In other words, give it your best. I mean, don't wait for somebody to flag it. Look for it, make it a priority. It's certainly far more dangerous than a couple of conservative Christian women on TV. So please, be better than this.
Congressman, I agree that this is very important, and I miscommunicated if I left the impression that we weren't proactively going to work on tools to take down this content and we're only going to rely on people to flag it for us. Right now, I think underway, we have efforts to focus not only on ads, which has been most of the majority of the questions, but a lot of people share this stuff in groups too, and the free part of the products that aren't paid, and we need to get that content down too. I understand how big of an issue this is. Unfortunately, the enforcement isn't perfect. We do need to make it more proactive, and I'm committed to doing that.
And I don't expect it to be perfect, but I do expect it to be a higher priority than conservative thought. Speaking of that, I think in some of your responses to Senator Cruz yesterday and some responses today related to liberal bias, you've sort of implied the fact that, well, you have these 20,000 enforcement folks. You've implied that the Silicon Valley, perhaps this was more yesterday, that Silicon Valley is a very liberal place, and so the talent pool perhaps leans left in its bias. Let me suggest that you look someplace, perhaps in the middle of the North American continent for some people. Maybe even your next big investment of capital could be in some place like, say, Bismarck, North Dakota, or Williston, where you have visited, where people tend to be pretty common sense and perhaps even more diverse than Facebook in some respects. If the talent pool is a problem, then let's look for a different talent pool, and maybe we can even have a nice big center someplace. I want to then close with this, because you testified yesterday, and the opening statement by the ranking member of the committee bothered me, in that suddenly there's this great concern that the providers, particularly Facebook, other large edge providers and content providers, should be hyper-regulated. When all along, we as Republicans have been talking about net neutrality. We talked about earlier this year or last year when we rolled back the internet service provider privacy stuff that seemed tilted heavily in your favor and against them. Don't you think that ubiquitous platforms like Google and Facebook and many others should have the same responsibility to privacy as an internet service provider?
Congressman, let me answer that in a second. And before I get to that, on your last point, the content reviewers who we have are not primarily located in Silicon Valley. So I think that was an important point, and I do worry about the general bias of people in Silicon Valley, but the majority of the folks doing content review are around the world in different places. To your question about net neutrality, I think that there's a big difference between internet service providers and platforms on top of them. And the big reason is that, well, I just think about my own experience. When I was starting Facebook, I had one choice of an internet service provider. Mm-hmm. And if I had to potentially pay extra in order to make it so that people could have Facebook as an option for something that they used, then I'm not sure that we'd be here today. Platforms, there are just many more. So it may be true that a lot of people choose to use Facebook. The average American, I think, uses about 8 different communication and social network apps to stay connected to people. It just is clearly correct or true that there are more choices on platforms. So even though they can reach large scale, I think the pressure of just having 1 or 2 in a place does require us to think a little bit differently.
I would submit to you that I have fewer choices on the platform, in your type of a platform, than I do internet service providers, even in rural North Dakota. With that, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I suppose you don't want to hang around for another round of questions. Just kidding. Mr. Zuckerberg.
Isn't he funny?
Your staff, several of them just passed out behind you. You know, on a serious note as we close, I would welcome your suggestions of other technology CEOs we might benefit from hearing from in the future for a hearing on these issues. As we look at net neutrality, as we look at privacy issues, these are all important. They're very controversial. We're fully cognizant of that. We want to get it right. And so we appreciate your comments and testimony today. There are no other members that haven't asked you questions, and we're not doing a second round. So seeing that, I just want to thank you for being here. I know we agreed to be respectful of your time. You have been respectful of our questions, and we appreciate your answers and your candor. As you know, some of our members weren't able to ask all the questions they had, so they'll probably submit those in writing. And we would like to get answers to those back in a timely manner. I'd also like to include the following documents be submitted for the record by unanimous consent: a letter from the American Civil Liberties Union, a letter from Net Choice, a letter from the Vietnam Veterans of America, which I referenced in my opening remarks, a letter from Public Knowledge, a letter and an FTC complaint from the Electronic Privacy Information Center, a letter from the Motion Picture Association of America, a letter from ACT, the App Association, a letter from the Committee for Justice, a letter from the Transatlantic Consumer Dialogue, and a letter from the civil society groups, and a letter from the National Council of Negro Women. Pursuant to committee rules, I remind members they have 10 business days to submit additional questions for the record, and I ask that the witness submit their responses within 10 business days upon receipt of those questions. Without objections, our committee is now adjourned.